Alright guys, I'm here back with a new video, and in this video I'm back with another review of the latest challenge season. This one, a pretty milestone season. We're going to be talking about the Challenge 40 Battle of the Eras, which is a season that started off pretty strong. I think it's a season that had a very strong cast, had some really interesting dynamics with it. I think it's a season that had some drama to where, again, I thought the first half or so of the season was, again, a very competently made season, but then it continues to drag. And obviously that is a major issue with modern challenge seasons, but I do feel like this season very much fits into that. And that, again, there were definitely some high points across the season. There were some fun episodes here and there, but I think by the end ends up, again, kind of just fitting in line with most other recent seasons. But with that, again, like my other reviews, I'll be running through the season from beginning to end. And let's start off with episode 0. Where again, they're still doing this for some reason. But weirdly, we do start off the season with the players already on location, where again, typically with episode 0s, we do focus on their trip there and get a lot set up through that. This time, literally none of that. But we do instantly see this cast of 40 of the most iconic competitors. And I will say, this is a pretty insane cast. I do think for the challenge, which is a show that I very much have criticized its casting in recent years, and there's definitely still some questionable picks here and there, I do think this is a truly elite cast of the show. I think easily the best challenge cast ever put together. And I do think the overall theme about the eras is something that, again, was so cool to see. I mean, something that obviously inherently embraces the history of the show. And I think it shows their at least care for that portion of the show. Again, the fact that they went out of their way to cast 10 people that debuted in each 10-season block of the series. Again, it takes a lot of work to fit into that specific theme. And again, they at least showed some dedication in making this happen, which again, I think has to be applauded here. But as for the episode itself, again, this ends up being a pretty cool retrospective, highlighting each of the eras with appropriate music playing during it, which was a nice little touch, along with the fact that we also get them being interviewed by Davon and Devin for some reason, which obviously I know that they're the hosts of the podcast, but still like felt pointless to have them there, considering all they do is just interview them in a group setting, which is literally on the show for just a couple seconds. That's literally it. But either way, I mean, let's run through the actual teams. We do got Era 1, the OGs, which again, cool to see a lot of these people back. I would say the one minor disappointment of all this is the fact that all these people were previously on All Stars. So all these people are people we've seen in the somewhat recent past. However, again, still cool to see them back on the flagship, even though, again, obviously it doesn't go well for most of them. But obviously through that, we get some of the best returning here, with CT making his return their few seasons off. We get Brad, Darrell, Derek K, Jody, Nisa, I guess. And it was pretty surreal to see the likes of Rachel, Tina, Mark, Katie on the flagship show. And again, just right away, we see an interaction between Horacio and Katie, and later one between like Rachel and Amanda. And just the fact that we are getting those sort of interactions on this season is just pretty cool to see. And along the way, we do hear Rachel say that Era 1 is the backbone of the challenge, which we definitely won't hear over and over again. Along with that, we also get like a weird focus on the Brad-Emily showmance, particularly focusing on Emily like before Era 2's segment, which was very strange. But either way, I mean, Era 1 here, I think a very solid grouping. I would say the gripes here would be like the likes of Tina, the likes of Katie, who were not really necessities for a flagship season in my eyes, but still overall very solid grouping here. With that, we get to Era 2, which TJ introduced as my era, I guess. I mean, obviously I know he debuted there, but again, I don't know if anyone was ever thinking of Era 2 as TJ's era, but this ends up having a pretty stacked female field here. And to coincide with that, also a pretty weak crop of men outside of Bananas, where obviously, again, Wes turned the season down, where, while it was cool to see someone like Nehemiah back on the flagship show, I did feel like the likes of Derek, Ryan, and Brandon were not the most exciting picks here. Again, the women field here was really stacked with the return of Emily, Cara, Kellyanne to the flagship show. Laurel is obviously there, and we do get the shock return of Aviv, which was so random, but really cool pick to see here. Again, someone that hasn't been back on the show since Fresh Meat 1, where obviously it would have been great to see the likes of Evelyn or Teresa here, but this is still a very strong grouping competitively, and also one that was very prone to drama. To which, alongside that, we obviously get a lot of focus on the Cara-Laurel relationship, as, again, you always will. But then we get to Era 3, where it is another pretty stacked grouping here. I feel like the only qualm here would be Avery, where, while again, I personally would be fine with Avery coming back for any given season, I do feel like for 40, it felt like a little bit questionable, especially like in place of someone like Ashley, where, again, that would have been a much bigger pick, but either way. But again, we do get the typical suspects of Corey, Amanda, Devin, Tori. Jordan shows up late, but obviously he was going to be there. We get the flagship returns for Leroy, Tony, Naya, and John Nay, with the latter of which being cool after all of her success on All Stars. But again, a lot of big names here. I mean, pretty close to the ideal grouping that you would want for this era. And obviously, alongside that, we get a lot of focus on the Amanda Tori rivalry because there won't be much time to focus on it down the road. But anyway, we also get to Era 4, where we do see the other eras boo them as they cheered, where while we do see some initial resentment towards the new era, that really doesn't end up leading to anything. But this team does end up having a weird mix of like the typicals of Casey and Josh, but also those that really popped on Battle for a New Champion, and the likes of Horacio and Nerys, who are now back as a couple, alongside Kylan, Michelle, and Olivia. But also we get some returnees from earlier in the era, from the likes of Paulie and Theo, who have done spin-offs since, and also Jenny, who is someone that I was pretty excited to see her follow up on her legacy after a really impressive win on Total Madness, to where, again, as a whole, I was pretty happy with the team here, with the only glaring omission here being Fessy, though I do think putting him on here would have given the Vacation Alliance even more power, to where I get why he isn't cast here, especially when you have someone like Kylan who's in a similar archetype that you could put over him. But again, I would have liked to see him face off against, again, it's pretty stacked cast, especially when like his entire thing is he wants to prove he's better than the legends of the game. But obviously a lot of focus around this team ends up revolving around the drama happened at the end of Battle for a New Champion between Nerys and Olivia, only for them to just patch it out and not playing a factor in the season at all, which was pretty underwhelming. Which I should mention the fact that supposedly the players ended up living together for a week before the game even started, which I think plays into this reconciliation. Again, giving them time to talk it out before the game properly started, to where, along with that, I do think we end up probably missing out on a lot of relationship building that happens in these early days of the season. That was kind of a weird choice from production to even like fly them out that early if that was going to be the case. But either way, the players end up eventually entering the house, which has this pretty interesting aesthetic of being this very like castle-like setting, the one filled with references to previous seasons, and us seeing many of those moments within this episode, including having a small segment for Diem, which was a nice touch. And we follow that up with a nude pool party, which was, again, a big dichotomy, where it is here where we get to set up the showmances of the season. Again, Devin, Michelle, Olivia, Theo, the latter of which get severely under-edited on this season. But after that, we culminate the episode with the arrival of Jordan, which, again, really funny how much they hype up Jordan's appearance on this season, when, again, his late entrance never ends up mattering beyond this. But anyway, we get to the formal episode 1, where we reintroduce the teams again. But the season really starts off with the Era Invitational, a way to eliminate 8 players right off the bat, where considering the season had a 40-person cast, larger than your typical season, having a massive purge at the beginning of it makes a lot of sense, with it also adding a lot of stakes to this, again, massive season that is season 40, to where I do really like this idea conceptually, even though, again, it does obviously lead to us losing out on some pretty big names and storylines early on. I do think that having this big event where almost half the cast goes into elimination right away, again, as a way to start off the biggest season yet, was, again, a fitting start. And also pretty insane that this all takes up 2 episodes of the actual show here. But again, we have all 40 players participating in the daily here at the same time, which was a really cool thing to see. Again, you don't really see this that much in the challenge, of everyone going at once. And again, seeing 40 people, 40 of the biggest names in the history of the challenge doing a challenge all at once was, again, pretty surreal to see. And I did like the aesthetic of the challenge as well. Again, it being at night and lit up by neon lights. So I at least like the idea of this challenge. But the overall format for this round ends up being pretty standard, outside the concept that they're playing within their own teams, where each team will have a winning male and female and a losing male and female. The losers obviously automatically go in, while the winners end up picking 2 other people to send in. Again, a really interesting start to this season in the sense that, again, everyone is extremely vulnerable here. And literally 2 out of every 5 players are going into elimination, so it really just adds stakes this first challenge as well. Again, I do think the challenge itself was not the most riveting in the world, other than them just having to solve a puzzle and then row out to boats to gather 10 lights. While, again, I think cool conceptually, I think kind of boring in practice, but I do actually like how it worked out on the show, where I liked how they utilized this opening challenge as a way to reintroduce players, giving each player their time to shine, allowing them to introduce themselves in the middle of the challenge, where while it led to it going a bit long on the actual show, I do think this was a very fitting way to start off the season to me. And through that, we do also get our first ever CT Pro Tip, which was a fun reoccurring bit of the season, having CT giving out this pretty basic advice, which again felt pretty fitting considering him being one of the most experienced in the show at this point. But he does end up winning here for Era 1 alongside Rachel, all while Katie and Mark end up losing, with Katie getting a pretty big dodo edit of her just rolling around in circles and ends up giving up by the end, though we do see Darrell and Anissa barely avoiding coming in last. And through that, we do see the teams immediately agree to just throw in those that came second to last into elimination, despite Anissa feeling initially safe because of her connection with Rachel, which doesn't end up playing out, with Rachel saying that it would be fair for the men to pick the women and women to pick the men, I guess. And essentially ends up just throwing Anissa under the bus, as obviously CT is going to throw in Anissa, and also to sure most people should throw in Anissa. Oh well, Darrell ends up finally escaping elimination somehow, where Derek ends up volunteering himself instead, which I didn't fully get. I mean, I get that they're friends, and there's points where Darrell has done things to protect Derek, though, again, the same way back to where, again, this felt like kind of a pointless choice, but again, doesn't end up really mattering. But anyway, on the Era 2 side of things, we do get a pretty underwhelming performance from Emily, who really takes forever to finish the puzzle, and barely ends up coming in 4th over Kellyanne, with Ryan being the other loser, as expected, all while we do get a lot of focus on the Laurel-Cara dynamic. Who would have guessed? With Laurel squeezing out the win here over Cara, to where with Bananas being the other winner, we do end up getting a lot of focus over Cara being worried about being voted in, which surely Laurel and Bananas won't take this first shot for no reason. But we do get some focus on this integration of the Ryan-Laurel relationship as well, which stemmed from Laurel's breakup with Nicole and her seeming to think that Ryan took Nicole's side, to where, again, it really just felt like a he said, she said, though it does lead to some fun confessionals from Ryan of him mocking Laurel along the way. But we do end up seeing Ryan wanting to go against Brandon, to where that ends up being a pretty easy choice. All for the women, we do see Aviv initially being assumed to go in, as she's the least connected of the team. But no, obviously they voted in Cara, with us getting a confrontation between her and Bananas at the chamber, which, to be fair, not the best play from Cara there, but also kind of questionable play from Bananas and Laurel to make an enemy of Cara from the very beginning, in a spot where, obviously, again, very likely she just comes back. And again, you don't even know what the full format is at this point. I think it's kind of a bit too early making big shots, especially as I do feel like Cara would have wanted to work with them had they not targeted her, but again, doesn't play that big of a factor on the season, realistically. But then we get to Era 3, where we do see Corey having a pretty impressive showing here, with him actually doing pretty well in the puzzle, getting good personal content about how his kids have been training him on puzzles, and he ends up winning here alongside Tori, as expected. Oh well, Naya and Leroy end up finishing in last, with Leroy in particular having a pretty pathetic performance here, going the wrong way at points, and ended up being last on the course in a spot where Devin beats him despite him having to swim the entire challenge, with him losing his boat at the very beginning, which again, not a good look for Leroy there. But Tori and Power, it does end up nullifying the intrigue of the vote here. Obviously, Amanda is going in due to their feud, and despite Tony's campaigning to vote in Jordan, obviously Jordan wasn't going in, and to be fair, probably too early to make that move at this current point anyway, considering, again, you don't know what the format is. But again, with Tori in charge, obviously she's never going to vote him in, and obviously Corey's not going to stick his neck out for Tony here either, to where, again, it ends up being kind of an easy vote here. Though we do see Amanda being upset at Corey because they had a connection through Nelson, though again, clearly that was never going to be too effective. But anyway, we then get to Era 4, where we shockingly see Michelle win for the women, which again was not even on my radar, especially amongst this really strong field of women on Era 4, with us seeing the likes of Casey and Jenny really underperforming here. But she ends up winning alongside Horacio as expected, though sadly for him, Nerys ends up losing to where he can't protect her, but she ends up losing here alongside Theo, who starts off his sucky season here. But we do get both losers being given what they want here, where despite Nerys and Olivia repairing their relationship, and again Michelle being best friends of Olivia, and Olivia ends up being voted in here anyway, all while we do see Theo calling out Paulie, with us getting a fight between them at the chamber, which I should mention the fact that we do strangely end the episode at the chamber before seeing any of the final decisions, with the episode just kind of abruptly ending, which was such a weird way to end the premiere. But then we get to episode 2, where obviously we continue the Invitational, with the episode entirely comprising of eliminations, 8 of them in a row, which again is cool conceptually as this massive event to start off the season, though again I did feel like this went on for a bit too long. But we did get some pretty strong matchups here, while also us getting the return of the most iconic eliminations in the history of the series, each representing an era, which again is a cool little touch there. Again, we saw Balls In for Era 1, Pole Wrestle for Era 2, Hall Brawl for Era 3, and Take Shelter for Era 4, which obviously that one in particular was a bit random here, that obviously being the CTJ elimination, which while it provided an iconic moment, I would not say the challenge itself was iconic. And through that, I do think we kind of missed out on having Not So Fast, which I do think is a more iconic elimination, though obviously again that was a couple seasons off of the criteria, but still felt a bit weird to have Take Shelter in this spot. But and at the end of the day, not a major gripe, though clearly the challenge is not nearly as physical as the other 3. But I did find it funny how self-congratulatory the show was in bringing these challenges back, with Cara Maria getting to applaud the producers for listening to fans, or bring back physical eliminations, which was just a weird inclusion, especially considering this doesn't stick for the rest of the season. But again, weirdly, we do have the elimination matchups already being decided by the start of the episode, with the episode incorporating flashbacks to explain how these happen, allowing for the eliminations to be broken up by some house events, which was an interesting editing style here for the challenge, where I feel like you very rarely see them utilizing these editing tricks. But weirdly, we do see the eliminations being doled out here in a similar way to how eliminations were picked back in the duel of each era, picking from a board which elimination they get. And we do get them played in order of when the challenges debuted, which I think all this felt kind of convoluted. It really just felt like they were adding a level of randomness to the game for no real reason, where I would have liked it better if each era was given their respective eliminations. I think that would have made a lot more sense. But anyway, we do start off with Era 3 having picked Balls In, where we do get a flashback to Corey and Amanda fighting over him not protecting her, only for Amanda to then lose to Naya as expected, though she does actually end up scoring a point, which is pretty shocking, especially against Naya, who's like double her size. Oh, while we do see Tony demolishing Leroy here, with this just being a pretty terrible season for Leroy, where again, I know there's rumors they just showed up for the check and for that kind of shows here, but through this we do see Bananas seemingly only rooting for Leroy, which ends up upsetting Tony, which he uses as part of his rationale for how he plays in the following episode. But also here we do see Devin really gloating over Leroy's elimination, where I guess he held resentment for him since Double Agents, which felt kind of random and just felt like a clear setup to All-Stars 5. But then we get to see Era 1, who had picked Pole Wrestle, which did feel a bit appropriate here with Anissa and Derek getting voted in. Anissa, the winner of the first ever Pole Wrestle, and Derek, someone who's become synonymous with Pole Wrestle, where we do end up seeing Derek versus Mark, with Derek unsurprisingly winning, though this ends up being Mark's worst showing in his entire career of the challenge, all while we see Anissa versus Katie, with us getting the typical incredulous Anissa, how dare they throw me in, when she's always held people back on every other season. But again, she obviously ends up beating Katie, to where the show really hypes up how well Katie performs here for some reason, but again, she loses either way. But then we get to Era 4, who had picked Hall Brawl, leading to a pretty lengthy flashback here revolving around Cara and Paulie, reacting to them getting nominated, with Paulie and Cara confronting Bananas for voting in Cara, which was some nice drama to see there. Again, the start of a lot of drama Bananas gets to across the season. But along with that, we also get some focus on the Reese Horacio relationship, with them seemingly having isolated themselves, which, I mean, to be fair, what do you expect from Horacio? But does lead into the Theo Paulie Hall Brawl, which felt like pretty bad luck for Paulie here, where obviously Theo just ends up demolishing him here in a pretty brutal elimination, where again, it just continues Paulie's underwhelming return to the series. But then we get to see what should have been a really exciting matchup of Olivia versus Nerys, with them getting to pay off their rivalry from the previous season, only for both of them to not go all out and seemingly be scared of hurting each other, which was, again, very underwhelming. Though, again, from a pure size perspective, it wasn't shocking to see Olivia pull this one out here. Again, we obviously end all this with Era 2 having picked Take Shelter, in a spot where Brandon talks about how he's going to beat Ryan in anything physical, and what a shocker, he doesn't get a physical comp. And here we do see the two eliminations being run simultaneously, and weirdly, midway through, we do get a flashback to the Cara CT relationship, which doesn't end up mattering at all on this season. But again, a pretty boring challenge, but Ryan ends up beating Brandon by the end, where I do think Brandon gets kind of screwed by the random draw here, all while Cara ends up still beating Kellyanne, as you would expect her to beat Kellyanne in most things, but really it's like kind of a lackluster way to end the night. But anyway, we do end the episode with the eliminated players staying behind, where you would think they would do some sort of redemption house, which again, I would not have hated on this season, though again, because the producers listened to fans that hated redemption house, they decided to not do that, which again, funny that they listened to fans in the spot where this actually would have been the perfect time to do it, especially after you just purged out a fifth of the cast at the very beginning of it. But again, what they do end up doing here is doling out the karma vote, which they give each player after they're eliminated, and how they're allowed to rate each of the remaining players, to which these points will end up mattering at the end of the game, which felt like a weird concept here. Now, again, I do think there are some interesting aspects to this format. However, at the end of the day, the way they handle this is very strange, and the fact that it seems like the points were completely unfettered, the fact that you can just literally give everyone a 5 or everyone a 1, again, that feels so arbitrary in that sense. Well, also, I don't think this necessarily works for something like the challenge, where there's so many pre-existing relationships, to where, again, it just gives advantages to people that are more connected pre-season, while also, this didn't even make for a good TV. Again, it's really funny how the show didn't even know how to handle this, where we literally just see them sitting in a chair filling out a ballot, which was, again, not TV friendly. And they don't even bother showing this in most future episodes, to where, again, it just felt like such a throwaway aspect of the season until it isn't. Now, with that, let's talk about the eliminated players, and there are a lot of them here. Again, we got literally 8 people to be talking about. So again, going through them era by era. For era 1, we did lose Katie, who I questioned why she was here to begin with. I mean, again, I like Katie. She's an incredible character. Even nowadays, where she's a bit more mellowed out, she still is able to bring some fun entertainment at points. But again, I felt like she was a weird pick for Challenge 40, even though, again, she is a very iconic presence. I did feel like she was someone that didn't really have much potential here. I felt like her going out first made a lot of sense. And with that, let's talk about Mark Long, who, again, I was happy to see back here as well. I mean, I do think this is a spot where, again, this clearly feels like Mark's last main show appearance. I'll be pretty surprised if he ends up being on the flagship again following this. But again, he was just kind of more of the same, just never really got a footing in the game. Obviously, gets just thrown in right away. Doesn't really get to do much. But again, at least for season 40, I think it was nice to see Mark there at least. Now for Era 2, we end up losing Brandon. Brandon's someone that I was pretty excited to see back in the challenge sphere. I was very happy that he was on All Stars 4. Honestly, personally, I didn't need him on 40 though. For obviously, it doesn't particularly go well though. Too fair, again, I think he gets very much screwed over just by what eliminations get picked here. Though, really, I don't think he was long for a game anyway. But I do like Brandon for the most part. I'm happy to see him back in the challenge sphere, even though, again, I would not have picked him for this season in particular. And then we also lose Kellyanne, who I think was a bigger loss. I mean, Kellyanne, someone that just recently on World Championship was such an incredible character, really a star of that season. And her to come into this season just, again, be kind of quiet and go out in a whimper was kind of disappointing, though. And also, happy to see her on a mainline show. It's to where, again, it was at least cool to see that, but obviously, again, didn't really do much in her run. Next up for Era 3, where obviously we lost Amanda. And again, despite the fact that Amanda was only on these first few episodes, I did feel like she had a pretty fun run here still. Again, obviously her going out early, not a shocker, especially in a very physical elimination. Yeah, again, I thought she brought a lot of entertainment to the show still. Again, her rivalry with Tori is still great. Her fight with Corey was also fun, where, again, she still brings a lot of drama to the show, to where despite the fact that, again, don't know her chances of winning any given season, I still think she is one of the better characters of Modern Challenge. But then we also lost Leroy, who, again, just felt like he was kind of there. I don't know. Again, this is just such a bad season for Leroy from a competitive front, to where I really did not feel like he was that into the game this season, where it felt like he, again, just kind of showed up for the paycheck, which, again, they're willing to cast him. Good on him for that. But I don't think he was someone that seemed to have that much gusto on this season. Again, he just had a kind of pathetic performance by the end, which I think is kind of disappointing, especially after Double Agents, where, again, considering I felt like that season was kind of a perfect way for Leroy to go out, I feel like for him to come back and just have this lackluster appearance here kind of ends up being a bit of a mark against his legacy for me. But then we get to Era 4, where obviously we lost Nerys, and Nerys was a big loss here. I think Nerys is someone that obviously would have been really great to see more of on this season. Again, I think her representing Era 4 would have been really cool as, again, this potential new face of the series. But again, for her to be out at the very beginning, very disappointing to see, considering, again, obviously had an incredible Battle for New Champions run, to where it would have been nice to see her repeat that here, but sadly that didn't happen. And also, obviously, we lose Paulie. And again, Paulie's someone that I loved his original challenge run. Again, Paulie never really came off as the best person in the world, but again, I always thought was incredible TV. However, since he's returned, he's obviously had 2 pretty lackluster runs now. Now, again, I think he kind of gets screwed in this spot. I do think he could have had some potential. It seemed like he had a decent amount of allies, but also just kind of gets screwed from the very beginning, getting thrown against Theo and Hall Brawl, which, again, was a losing battle. But again, despite how underwhelming these runs have been, I would still like to see Paulie back. I still think there is potential for Paulie. Just, again, these last few seasons have not really worked out for him. But with that, we finally move on to episode 3, which starts with flashbacks to Devin and Vendettas beating Bananas, which was a nice nostalgic touch in how to start every episode here. It's starting with an old clip that correlates to what happens in the episode. You know, this one barely does so, and for a lot of them barely do so. But still, initially we do get a lot of content on the broken up showmances, with Cara getting confessionals about Paulie, and us seeing Michelle trying to cheer up Horacio after Nerys's elimination, which felt like pretty strong content for Michelle, in her being able to pick up Horacio as an ally, even though that ends up really going nowhere. But we also do get some focus on the Darrell-Aviv relationship, with them having won together back in Fresh Meat, and talk about how they're obviously going to be working together, only for Darrell to throw her under the bus by the end of the episode. But strangely, that ends up never coming up again beyond that on this season. But anyway, we do also get some drama revolving around Naya, with her seemingly getting close to Josh at the beginning of the episode, only for her to later hook up with Kylan, during which we do see a group joking around about it, including Tori, which annoys Josh, where he thought she was his friend, leading to a fight that felt kind of humorous, and how Tori was incredulous at how he doesn't want to be her friend anymore. And we also have like Michelle standing in between them eating ramen during it. So again, kind of a funny scene. But anyway, we do get to the daily, where they have to pick representatives for each of their teams, where this obviously ends up starting the chain of targets that we see moving forward. And this is probably the most fair way of handling this, to allow the players themselves to decide amongst themselves who has that role. But again, I really don't like that they have this format that relies on people volunteering initially for something that's bad, and feeling like they're trapping the the players into sabotaging themselves. But the challenge itself ends up mostly being a rowing challenge, with them following that up with eating Vietnamese delicacies and organizing the challenge logos in chronological order, which felt like a random combination of things by the end. But here we do see Era 1 being a complete disaster during the rowing portion, with Brad not knowing how to use a rudder and Jody's paddle breaking along the way to where they easily come in last. All while Era 3 ends up easily winning, with Tony getting really hyped up for doing well in the eating portion. And we see Tori leading them in solving the logos as well, with her memorizing all the seasons before it came out, as again should on a season like this. And the fact that others didn't is kind of insane. But this is where we do find out the general format of the first half of the season, in that the representatives from a losing team, as expected, are automatically going into elimination, which in this spot ends up being Jody and Darrell, while the reps from the winning team in Tony and Avery now get to pick between the other two teams to decide which representatives go against Jody and Darrell, which is a format I don't like, as it completely limits the possibilities coming into each week, which, I mean, maybe that was intentional from production's point of view. Maybe they felt like because you have such a large group of people, to only focus on these 8 people that could potentially go home every episode was something that was just easier to follow from their point of view. But I do think it really stagnates the gameplay. It now makes that, again, only 8 people are in danger every round, in where the others can have the luxury of not having to worry about elimination in the short term, and also have no real incentive of performing well in the dailies outside of, again, keeping their team strong, even though they're already told that it's an individual format, which means that there's no long-term ramifications of not keeping your team strong. Where again, I think there is an easy way to solve this, in that you keep the initial portion of the format and that the losing representatives end up automatically going in. But I think it would be a lot better if the winners of the challenge had full reign over who to pick. Again, making the game a lot more dynamic, as instead here ends up being this binary choice. As in this spot, again, the winners only have 2 teams to pick from, which again just really limits their options there. And while obviously in this round it plays out in an interesting way, it ends up most of the time just being a very easy decision that, again, just doesn't make for good TV. But again, we do get some intrigue here in the choice between Derek and Aviv and Casey and Kylan, with Avery being really close to Derek and wanting to protect him, all while we see Tony making a deal with Era 4, where just in general, Eras 3 and 4 seem to have a lot of connective tissue to where kind of get why Tony would want to build that trust with Era 4, but not when Avery is so gung-ho about saving Derek, to where, and this obviously ends up making this a very questionable play for Tony to go so far out of his way to save people from Era 4, these people that he doesn't have a true connection with yet. And while I would also criticize Avery for not backing down the spot as well, I do feel like Tony's decision feels a lot more unnecessary, considering he doesn't really even have connections to those people, with the edit even seemingly condemning Tony in this spot as well, showing confessionals of other people, calling this a dumb move, and that he's doing this just for his ego, and also people suspecting that Tony wants to quit the game, which I know he's reviewed post-show, but weird that they edited him in this way if that isn't the case, which I'll also say is probably not a great sign about how production feels about Tony at this point, especially as we follow this up with positive talk about Avery and her standing up for her voice, I guess. But again, we do get to the arena where we do actually get a flashback to Zach and Amanda in Final Reckoning, and what do you know? We get the stalemate and they have the exact same ruling, in that both Tony and Avery are now sent in instead, but again, the show dunking on Tony for all this. I'll always see Derek being appreciative to Avery, saying that he is a true friend that has his back, which really makes you question, is Derek really that good of a friend? Like, why isn't he throwing himself into elimination here? Like, why isn't he just telling Avery to put him in? So obviously I get it for the game, but I do feel like it's weird that people didn't seem to talk as much about the Derek perspective here of, like, again, if you were really that good of a friend, you would have thrown yourself in and not made Avery risk yourself in this spot. But also here we do get the reveal that eliminations will be done individually, which why not tell them that before? Though realistically, I don't think it would have changed anything in this spot, but again, just feels like another thing of the challenge, just not telling people the format, which again just makes them make uninformed decisions. But either way, we do get a pretty physical puzzle as the elimination here, again moving heavy tiles to create a walkway where all the colors end up lining up. Again, a very logic-based puzzle here, though there did seem to be a very precise combination that was needed here to solve this, considering there were less of certain colors. It made this a somewhat interesting challenge with people making mistakes left and right. But first we do see Tony versus Darrell, with Tony again being dunked on in the edit, with people questioning if he was throwing the challenge, which was a bad look for him. But again, Darrell wins here, while Avery and Jody both end up struggling with the puzzle portion, but Avery ends up pulling out the win here, where we do end the episode, the final piece of the format, and that the reveal that the elimination winners will be picking the targets for the following round, with each player picking a player from each era of the opposite gender, adding an interesting dynamic here of you needing to have these connections with people of the opposite gender, but also gives those picking interesting incentives here, as typically you would want to keep the stronger players of the opposite gender around for the final to be paired up with, but also taking out these stronger players can weaken the opposing team, to where I do think that adds an interesting dynamic here, even though that was largely nullified by teams creating this volunteering system and the target picker usually going along with that to get less blood on their hands. But it was funny to see Darrell in this position, who notoriously tries to play under the radar. But overall, I do think this is a pretty good way to end the episode, giving you a sneak peek into what will happen in the following episode, but not really sapping the following episode of any of the momentum that was built up through this episode, which is something that I think a lot of modern reality shows do. With that, again, let's talk about the eliminated players, starting it off with Jody. And Jody had a pretty quiet run on this season. I don't really feel like she did that much here. She just, was kind of there, gets kind of sniped out. Very much an afterthought in her boot episode. Overall, it was cool to see Jody back on the show after the duel. Again, she really didn't do much here. And with that, talk about Tony. And Tony had a much more interesting run, obviously. Tony was very much just all over the place, to where I do personally question what Tony was exactly doing on this season. I do question if he was just trying to make good TV to be brought back for multiple appearances, which, again, I don't know how exactly that's going to work out for him, as I do think it becomes very clear that he was on the bottom of the Era 3 power structure early on. And I do wonder if he realized that, well, if I'm screwed anyway, I might as well go make good TV, to which, again, he did. But obviously from a gameplay front, this was a pretty abysmal showing, one where it seemed like a lot of the house was pretty upset what he was doing, and he was just a player that never really gained any traction. Though, again, I was personally happy to see Tony back. I think his development over the course of the series has always been really interesting to see, and I still would like to see him back down the road, though I do question how much production is in love with him at this point. But with that, we move on to episode 4, where you start off with a lot of content around how Darrell was pissed off Anissa and Laurel by picking them, leading to a lot of focus on Anissa, with her talking about how underestimated she is and that she can do anything. Which, yeah, except for win a challenge season. But again, this leads to decent content from Jenny of her trying to lift her up, which surely that connection won't lead to the two going into elimination. Now, beyond that, we also get a weird Emily Brad date, which was largely boring, but we did get Avery saying that she likes to live through them and she's a pervert for sherbet, which is such a ridiculous line. But then we get to the daily, which ends up being trivia about challenge history, which was a nice way to celebrate the history of the series, though weird that this was happening so early on in the season. But essentially the game ends up being Jeopardy, obviously here played in eras, but when you miss a question, 2 people from your team get eliminated, to which in this we get a lot of hype for Kylan and how smart Kylan is, only for him to completely fail in this spot, largely, again, getting most of the questions wrong, though to be fair, I do think he gets pretty unlucky in getting some really difficult questions. That does lead to Era 4 losing here, with Horacio and Jenny automatically going in, where, again, those are obviously 2 really heavy hitters there. Oh, we see CT get injured as he falls into the water here, where he has to be taken out by ambulance, which was very shocking to see CT go out in that way, where obviously he does return to the game afterwards, but again, not the greatest sign that the strongest competitor on Era 1 is someone that got knocked out of commission by a pretty insignificant aspect of this challenge. But either way, Eras 2 and 3 are the 2 that end up fighting for the win here, leading to sudden death between Laurel and Jordan, with Jordan losing because he doesn't know Devin's rival from Rivals 3, aka Cheyenne, Corey's baby mama, who he supposedly knows, leading to a lot of doubt from Corey and Devin over whether or not Jordan threw the challenge, with the edit also implying that he did, even though Jordan ends up denying it. Though, to be fair, would have been a fine move for him, considering obviously Laurel's going to save him anyway, and obviously through that he doesn't have to get blood on his hands. But we do end up seeing Laurel and Bananas winning the daily, with Laurel instantly getting into a fight with Darrell, saying, "Fuck you, Darrell," or he says, "Fuck you too," only for her to then proceed to call him out for getting massages from Emily. That's why he made that decision, which is a weird thing to do here, where again, Laurel ends up coming off very unlikable across the season. But again, this felt like an unnecessary tactic. But through that, we also get Emily picking up on the fact that Laurel must not like her, which again might lead into the following episode. But the choice here is between Derek and Anissa and Jordan and Naya. And again, this ends up being a pretty easy choice here, with Laurel being pretty unwilling to throw Jordan into elimination. And obviously Bananas is ended up fighting for it here, which again, I'm sure seeing Tony having just thrown himself in probably played a factor into that, and I'm not wanting to risk another stalemate. But we do get a lot of talk here about how the best move is to take the shot at Jordan, or even see a meeting between Era 2 trying to convince them to take out Jordan. though that ends up going nowhere. Well, in the chamber, we do get a pretty fun moment here from Derek, pulling out paper and showing them all the outcomes, offering Era 2 an alliance, only for that to fall through as well. But again, we do get Derek and Anissa being voted into elimination that has them have to grab a ball and shoot it down a track, and as it rolls down, they're able to pick up jacks. Still have to catch the ball in time for them to count. A controversial elimination here, particularly due to the final board they put the jacks into being a seemingly faulty one that would have the jacks falling out constantly. Through that, production seemingly made a rule that the jacks don't have to stay on the wall, though we did get reports about how production members would place some of the jacks back into place for some reason, despite again it supposedly not mattering, and this did lead to some controversy concerning the later results. But again, first we do end up seeing Anissa versus Jenny, where Jenny has a pretty underwhelming performance here, stemming from her asthma. She takes constant breaks to catch her breath, which again did not feel in line with the Jenny that we saw back in Total Madness, but again, she ends up beating Anissa anyway here, as again you would expect her to beat Anissa. But then we get to the more interesting elimination, Derek versus Horacio, which is where the controversy ends up stemming from, where despite Horacio having a lead for the entire challenge, we do see Derek seemingly catching up to him at the last second, where the results are said to be too close to call, where eventually it's announced that Derek has won, which seemed to really come out of nowhere, the show seemingly blaming it on Horacio, taking it slow at the end and walking to the finish, showing him as overconfident, which all this did lead to a decent chunk of controversy outside the show, with both Nerys and Horacio accusing production of rigging the challenge, to the point where I was pretty shocked that they actually bothered to respond, where supposedly they ended up showing both Derek and Horacio the raw footage, and Horacio ended up conceding to the point that he lost fair and square, seemingly missing out on the rule that the jacks don't need to stay on the wall, with him thinking that production putting them back on the wall was helping Derek, and that's why he took it slow at the end, was again due to that misunderstanding, thinking that he had a big lead, where again, this loss was definitely one that was on him by the end, though still a bit of a fluky loss, to where, again, it seems to stem from a misunderstanding, and considering initially he was like so pissed off by this loss here that he didn't want to come back to the show, I do think that would have been a waste considering how much potential he clearly has as a competitor, where while he's, again, not the most riveting TV, I do think he is someone that I personally would still like to see back, until at least he gets his win, which I'm assuming he will eventually, though obviously whether or not he would accept at this point is a little bit rocky. But through that, obviously we do have Derek and Jenny picking the targets, leading to actually some intrigue here from people volunteering, where CT initially volunteers, annoying Josh, who is also meant to volunteer here, though proceeds to not, thinking that the only reason other people are volunteering is because they think Josh is an easy beat, which leads to Jenny nominating Kylan as payback instead, which, to be fair, is probably the better call from Jenny's point of view anyway, though this does come off as pretty negative content for Josh, making him look very wishy-washy here. But also we do get drama revolving around Corey, who is also meant to volunteer, doesn't go through with it, leading to Devin getting thrown in instead, where it was kind of funny to see these eras thinking that they had this format gamed, only for that to just instantly crumble around them pretty quickly here. But with that, again, let's talk about the eliminated players. We're obviously losing Nisa, and again, not shocking. I mean, I'll say, I don't really qualm with the fact that Anissa was on this season, where I think a lot of people are like frustrated, why is Anissa getting cast over and over again? However, again, this is Challenge 40. Again, this is a landmark season. I think to not have Anissa, who's obviously one of the most experienced people in the history of the show, again, I think would be a loss, where, while again, I don't personally like Anissa that much, I don't think she really brings much to the show, especially in the modern day. I do feel like she is someone that, again, kind of need to be here, even though, again, her run was just kind of annoying with her constantly complaining about how people underestimate her. But beyond that, also, we lost Horacio, who, as I mentioned, again, I would like to see back still. Again, while his run here was not great, and to be fair, I don't know how into the game he would necessarily always be. I do think he is probably one of the most talented raw competitors in history of the show, and is someone that I think could very easily win a season down the road. And especially if you bring him back with Nerys, I think that's still going to be an interesting dynamic, to where, again, I think Horacio's run here was, again, kind of underwhelming, especially due to the fact that Nerys ended up leaving early, which made him kind of on the outs of the political part of the game, while also, again, just naturally he's not the most riveting character, but again, still someone that I still think has potential for down the road, where I would still like to see him back. And over episode 5, where we start off the episode with some drama relating back to Josh's decision from the previous episode, with Olivia being annoyed as she wanted to be paired up with Josh, as Josh has allies that would protect her, which I do think is actually an interesting aspect of this format, and the fact that obviously it is important who you're paired up with, as, again, you are nominated as a pair, and if you are with a well-connected partner, you're obviously less likely to be voted in. And it was nice to see the players here at least thinking that through and attempting to pair up accordingly. But along with that, we do also get a lot of focus on the Vacation Alliance, with Janae finally being on their show, where she talks about how much of a threat they are, conveniently, just as it's her turn to self-nominate herself at the end of the round, that she says she doesn't want to do because she doesn't want to play other people's games. So I wonder what's going to happen there. But we also get a weird segment of her trying to convince CT to not put her up, and CT ends up just complaining about how selfish she is, which felt like an unnecessary segment just to shit on John A. But either way, we also get focused on Nehemiah with him being worried about going to elimination with CT, which thank you for hiding the result of the episode from the very beginning. But does lead to Nehemiah trying to make a deal with Devin to keep each other safe, only for that to go nowhere. Outside playing into an argument later on in the chamber as Devin ends up turning this down. But we also do see his relationship with Corey, with them kind of being a rootable duo here, obviously outside of the core power structure. And while they're never really able to do much in the game, I did feel like this is an interesting dynamic to see put together. But anyway, we then get to the daily, which has them having to work in teams as they navigate a Y-shaped beam through a course where, what do you know, everyone's a disaster once again, with CT and Tina arguing over how they aren't listening to each other, leading to a pretty big fight afterwards, which was probably the most upset I've seen CT in a bit. But obviously with them being the targets for this round, they both end up going into elimination. Meanwhile, we do see Era 3 struggling with Jordan yelling at Tori constantly because it's Jordan for you, and we do see Era 2 starting to fall behind, with Laurel literally being behind because Laurel decides to throw the challenge here as Emily is a target, and Emily is one of the biggest threats on the board, and so not working with her to where, again, like for Laurel, being rid of Emily is definitely not a bad move for her. And I do think, again, that is a kind of a flaw in this format, the fact that because these people know that it's going to be an individual game by the end, it kind of gives these people no incentive to really even try in the dailies, as again, they're not in danger of going home, only the targets are. And I think that's kind of a lame aspect of all this, even though it did lead to interesting TV in this spot. And well, again, I do think getting rid of Emily is definitely not a bad call in this spot. I do think what is a bad call is how Laurel approaches this, where obviously the fact that she's doing this so blatantly to the point where just everyone knows what she is doing ends up, again, just leading it to other people being willing to do the same thing back to her, which again, I think is a negative ramification for what she attempts to do here. But again, this does all lead up to Era 4 winning the challenge, with Kyla and Olivia now having to choose between Nehemiah and Emily or Devin and Tori, and with Eras 3 and 4 seemingly working together, not having much connective tissue to those nominated in Era 2, and again, not helped by the fact that the edit was very much signaling that Era 2 was going in anyway. But again, we do see Nehemiah trying to get his way out of this by throwing Devin under the bus due to their previous conversation, but this ends up being turned around on him by the end, with Era 4 taking Devin and Tori's side. Which, as annoying as it is to see Devin and Tori play like a very boring game and kind of just skate through a lot of the game, it is still a spot where they are playing it well. Again, they are able to cultivate this aura around them that they are these honest players, which again, I do think benefits them in this spot, where I think that's a large reason why Tori and Devin are saved here, because they just think that Tori and Devin will stick to their deals, which to be fair, they probably will. But obviously a major event in this episode ends up focusing around the Cara Laurel dynamic, with it really exploding in this spot, with this probably being the biggest fight of the season that supposedly was even bigger in real life. But it does start initially with Laurel and Michelle fighting over Laurel's remaining hatred of her from Ride or Dies, but Cara decides to back Michelle up here, upsetting Laurel even more, leading to this big blow up while Cara is dyeing her hair, where again, it was just really Laurel just yelling at Cara for most of it. Really just a terrible look for Laurel, especially with most of the cast taking Cara's side here. And really just in general, this entire situation just feels very icky, where I've been a proponent of Challenge being a show that should have more drama, that we've kind of been missing out on a lot of this drama from early seasons. Yeah, I do feel like this felt a lot more personal and a lot more negative to watch, which again just wasn't as fun. And again, supposedly it was worse in real life, where Laura ended up bringing in like Cara's abusive relationships, and Cara had to supposedly leave the house for a few days and see therapists, and even see production having to split them up. And again, it's just kind of painful to watch, to where I think it's pretty clear at this point this is just such a dysfunctional relationship, to where I don't ever expect to see Cara and Laurel being on particularly good terms down the road. But following the fight, we do weirdly get some content from Kylan of him blaming this entire situation on Cara, being one of the only proponents for Laurel, which was a very strange segment here, which I assume is them doing damage control in the case they bring back Laurel down the road, which I assume they will. Just make this like not entirely negative on Laurel, where again, it felt like 90% of the house was pro Cara in this specific situation. But either way, we get to the arena where we see hammers and nails, with the challenge being to remove 100 nails from a wall using a hammer, which was such a random challenge that actually does lead to some surprising results, starting off with Emily versus Tina, where shockingly Tina just demolishes this challenge, being able to knock the nails off easily in a spot where Emily ends up struggling after trying to utilize the same strategy Tina was doing, which was impressive to see from Tina, but also feels very suspicious, as it very much did feel like Tina's nails were probably just not nailed in as well, to where Tina ends up having an easy win here, and ends up giving Emily her first ever loss in elimination, which again, funny that that's to Tina of all people. But that is followed up by another upset, and us getting CT versus versus Nehemiah, with both again having similar struggles to Emily, again making Tina's performance feel much more like a fluke. But we do end up seeing Nehemiah narrowly having the lead the entire time and pulling out this massive upset, being the first time CT's lost a season since Total Madness, which is pretty insane. And again, I expect the CT to have a big target on his back coming into this season. So while I personally picked him as my winner pick, I definitely had those worries, but I do think this season probably turns out as bad as it possibly could have been. But again, this feeling like the type of elimination that CT probably should have won. But we obviously conclude the episode, the targets being picked, with Nehemiah having some interesting choices here, picking Laurel because of all the turmoil she's causing, but also despite us getting set up to his relationship with Janae, and Janae proceeding to not volunteer in a spot where her entire team wants her to, Nehemiah ends up picking her anyway. Which, I mean, to be fair, I don't really understand why Nehemiah does that, as I do think that's a pretty suboptimal move for him, but obviously this ends up leading to Janae being a big social pariah coming into the next episode. But either way, with that, again, let's talk about the boots. And we lost CT, which, and CT was fun on this season. Again, obviously he wasn't there for long, but again, he had the CT Pro Tip segments, which were kind of funny. He obviously did not seem to be in the greatest shape here. Again, it did not seem like the CT that we saw back in Spies, Lies, and Allies. But also, again, he was on a sinking ship. Obviously, Arrow 1 was just a pretty disastrous team, and it seemed like he was really able to do much with that group. And to be fair, even if he did survive this, I would assume CT would have been a big target down the road, where I don't know if he really has those connections that would have kept him safe for too long. So again, that leads to this being a pretty mediocre run. That we also lost Emily. And again, losing Emily in this way was also very shocking. I mean, Emily is someone that I think was a potential all-time great competitor coming into the season. I think she's one of these that if we just got more of her, I think she would be truly amongst the best of the best. And I do think her coming back for this season was, again, pretty hype in the sense that, again, she's one of the top competitors of all time, and she kind of flops. Now, to be fair, I think this elimination loss is pretty fluky. Again, it's literally a challenge of them pulling out nails, and Tina just had like such a ridiculously easy time with it, to where I don't really fault Emily that much for that, but really her performance outside that still was also not particularly great. And I do think, and in general, this is obviously just kind of a lackluster return from her in a spot where, again, I would still like to see her back potentially. They just get more out of Emily, just to see if she's able to really stack up against the best of the best, and maybe some place like All Stars is probably a better place to see her than the mainline show. But again, I would want to see Emily back, though I don't know how much she's personally dying to come back to another season. But with that, we move on to episode 6, with us getting a lot of focus early on Laurel and Bananas, who are the targets for Era 2, and at this point, our social pariahs in the house, though, do have a couple connections within the targets, with Josh and Jenny, the targets for Era 4, with talk from Josh about not wanting to cross Bananas again like he did in USA 2, so I wonder what's going to happen there. But we do also get a lot of talk from Kara about how after Laurel threw the challenge to get Emily out, she now wants to do the same, which again shows the downsides of Laurel making that move. Though really at the end of the day, Kara doesn't go through with it anyway. But so we see Jenny being upset at her team for no one volunteering, to where this does lead to Casey finally being on the show, with her being used to just mock Jenny, to where it legitimately just felt like that's what she did on this season. That's literally her only content, is scolding Jenny for not having connections in the game, and says that all she talks about are guinea pigs and working out, which is like, that's still more interesting than you, Casey. Also, here we do see Janae becoming a pretty clear target of people being annoyed at her for not volunteering, and again, we get focused on her relationship with Nehemiah, which again goes nowhere, and again, weird considering it was never really focused on before this season, where I guess now we see that they're extremely close. But again, clearly this was all setting up Janae to be going into elimination. But either way, we get the daily, which was a weird challenge of them having to transfer balloons from one side of the field to the other and avoid popping them, which didn't feel very challenging. But what do you know? We see Arrow 1 being a disaster once again, and them popping a bulk of their balloons at the very beginning, and Derek also proceeding to injure his leg in the process, to where he ends up finishing the challenge hopping around. And I'll say, like, in general, very impressive for him to stay in the game with that injury, but again, just showing how much of a disaster Era 1 is at this point. And with that, we do see Rachel and Brad having to go do elimination, all while we do see Jordan being a dick again, yelling at Janae and trying to rush through the challenge, only for him to pop his balloons, leading to Era 4 in the challenge here, which I never would have guessed considering all that setup of Josh and Jenny's relationship with Bananas and Laurel. But again, we do see both Josh and Jenny pretty instantly wanting to save Bananas, with obviously both of them being pretty close to him. Bananas doing his typical thing of trying to guilt Josh into saving him after what he did in USA 2. But we do see Era 4 being annoyed at them for doing so, and them keeping together the two biggest threats in the game, though I really don't think it makes much sense for Jenny in particular to flip here, considering Bananas is one of the only people she has at this point. Wall is also, again, a stronger guy that will keep her safe. Though I do think for Josh, I do have a bit more questions here, especially considering how he does have this connection with Corey, that by, again, siding with Bananas and Laurel, he is throwing Corey and Janae into elimination. It feels like he's burning those relationships in the process. But also here, we do get this weird subplot that ends up being very important for the season down the road of Bananas deciding to warn Michelle about Devin and how he's using her, which obviously gets back to him. We see Devin confronting him about this, and all this felt like it's so unnecessary from Bananas. Like, this all felt like extremely sloppy play. And fair, Bananas is on the bottom anyway. I do think Bananas is in a spot where a lot of his allies have kind of gone, and he's kind of in this spot where there's so many people in the house that are not in his corner to where, like, he's kind of screwed either way. But I do think this kind of just burns his social capital even more and puts him in a spot where he has these feuds that stem from this. Again, he has a feud with Michelle and Devin and Tori, probably more importantly, for down the road, which ends up significantly harming his game. And all that, again, just stemming from this sloppy play here. And which, I mean, he claims preseason that he was hearing about Devin already planning on targeting him, which, to be fair, would not be shocking. But I don't think that this is the way to approach trying to target Devin is by trying to turn his girlfriend against him, which, again, was not going to happen. And again, it just makes him an even bigger social pariah in the house. But we get to the arena where Corey and Janae are voted in, and we do get a pretty interesting elimination here of the players being given balls and they need to throw onto spikes behind their opponents, and obviously their opponents can try to block the balls. And I found this overall to be one of the better eliminations of the season, with both matchups here being pretty interesting, where first we do get Brad versus Corey, and Corey picking up on the optimal strat here of in that once you get a lead and your opponent misses balls, you might as well throw them out of play to give them less opportunities to score and just play defensively, which I do think this led to this fun standoff between the two, but Corey ends up winning that by the end. We get Rachel versus Janae. It all culminates in Rachel winning this as expected as well. And with that, let's talk about the boots. We do lose Brad here, and he was on this season. Really, I think most of his content was just over on Emily. I don't really think he brought that much to the table. And Brad is just a weird figure now, where like he is kind of this mainstay, especially of these like old school competitors. Again, like he's someone that if he's on All Stars, I would not be that opposed to it, even though he doesn't really bring much to the table anymore. I don't feel like he brings much drama to the show anymore. He's also not even that good of a competitor anymore, but he is still like a legend of the game, to where I still think he adds prestige when he's on a cast, even though, again, it kind of feels like his heyday might have passed. Also, we do lose Janae, and again, I really like Janae. I was very happy for her and her, again, having that really incredible 3-season stretch on All Stars. The thing is, though, since then, she's not been the greatest. And I've always said that I think Janae is like the type of player that really excels on All Stars. I don't know if that would translate to the flagship show. And again, I don't think it particularly translated here. I don't think she really has the connections, and also isn't really amongst the best of the best physically to really face off against the best of the best in my mind. But she still is a very strong competitor, and someone that's at least playing the game very actively. And while, again, I definitely qualm with her decision-making at points, she's someone that is, again, at least trying to play a strategic game, and at least that's something to be respected. Though, obviously, again, in this season in particular, she was kind of under-edited until her sloppiness towards the end, and really, there's not too much to say from this specific run. But with that, we move on to episode 7, where we start off with getting some strong content from Rachel for reaching out to Nehemiah for an alliance, wanting to get eras 1 and 2 to work together, which, to be fair, felt like more of a marriage of convenience due to the fact that eras 3 and 4 were clearly working together. But again, this was good strategic content for Rachel, with her definitely getting this building winners at it at this point, with them starting to highlight her political game, all while we also get introduced to the Nehemiah-Naya relationship, because actually matters now, with them obviously being targets alongside Kylan being a target for Era 4, which obviously makes this a difficult decision for Naya if she were to win the daily, which I wonder if she will. But again, we do get to the daily where we get a lot of focus on Darrell and his fear of heights, so I wonder if this will be a heights challenge. What do you know? It's a heights challenge where they have to jump off a building, grab flags, and have their other teammates pull them back up, solve a puzzle at the end, which led to really wonky results. And I just find like so many aspects of the challenge like very strange. Like I find it strange in the fact that they had to do this random draw to determine who has the jump, which is like, why? Like, why not allow the players themselves to decide? And obviously the reason is because they want these moments of these people that don't want to jump, but again, just felt like a bit contrived there. And also felt very strange in the sense that it felt like certain teams a lot more struggle in pulling people up than others, where we see Era 4 in particular very much struggling and pulling their people up, to which they end up coming in last, meaning that Kylan and Michelle end up going into elimination. We see Era 1 going and obviously getting a lot of focus on Darrell, who ends up overcoming his fears this time, which is funny considering he still ends up going into elimination by the end anyway. But also weirdly, we do see Era 1 only being allowed to have one player on the puzzle because of their low number of people, which is like, why? Why is that a thing? And also, again, really dumb that they didn't really seem to accommodate these dailies for the size of the groups. And to be fair, I think they probably never expected a team to get as demolished as Era 1 did. But still, the fact that, like, and there was this random draw to determine who jumps, except for Era 1, where just all of them had to jump because they didn't have enough people. And again, now, if like, why only allow them to have one puzzle? And again, down the road, there's more issues. Again, I just don't understand what they were thinking, because again, most of the times it just leads to the same result of the team that has smaller people just going to elimination over and over again, which is not interesting. Ultimately, you see Era 3 pull out the win, where at this point, the choice here is pretty obvious, where despite that setup earlier, again, the choice now isn't between Nehemiah and Kylan, because Kylan's already automatically going in, which means obviously she's just going to pick Nehemiah. And we do see Tina being shocked to hear that she's being thrown into elimination, with her thinking that she was really close to Naya, where you see her confronting Naya and Jordan, which did lead to some nice old school Tina content here. It felt like we were missing for a bit, but beyond that, we do end up actually spending a lot of the episode focusing around the drama from the other teams, with us getting a lot from Banana, setting up his annoyances with Ryan, who hasn't had to go into elimination, and really contributes very little to the challenges as a whole, where we see Banana's trying to get Ryan to volunteer, where Ryan somehow is able to get away from being nominated once again. But also we see a lot of tension within Era 3, with Devin saying that Michelle would never pick him, despite it being his turn to volunteer, and won't be volunteering himself, which again goes against the rotation that was set up, pissing off Corey, who was clearly at the bottom of the group. But I really don't think this should have been that big of a deal, as Corey's going to have to throw himself in eventually. And maybe they're thinking that this format will end soon, or maybe that's not the case. But again, it's not like this is the last time that people are going to be voted in, where again, if Corey throws himself in now, then it's like, you're just going to be safe for the next round anyway. And also, it's like, wouldn't that just be logical that Michelle wouldn't throw Devin in? To where, while I understand Corey's frustrations at being at the bottom of his group, I didn't feel like this specific situation was kind of dumb. But anyway, we get to the arena where Tina and Darrell are voted in, with the elimination being a really boring one, of them having to navigate through a box that has sliding doors, and that was just boring to see. And then we follow that up with a math equation for one of the billion times on this season, which was also boring. But first we do see Michelle versus Tina, where we do see both struggling with the basic math there is, until Michelle ends up unsurprisingly pulling out the win. While we then get Kylan versus Darrell, where we see Kylan obviously going on to win, with the show really hyping up how good he is at math, with him being called the calculator, and ends up getting it right away. While Darrell actually ends up being the one to get out of the box first, though ends up wasting a bit too much time trying to figure out the math and lean to the Kylan win. But again, we do get some intrigue from the target selection here, with Era 1 obviously just having to go in at this point, where we're only down to Derek K and Rachel, where from now on they have to be the targets until the format changes. We then see Ryan again avoiding being nominated, with Michelle picking Derek over him for some reason. We see obviously Corey picked for Era 3, and Jenny getting picked for the third time for Era 4, which she certainly won't be annoyed at again. But with that, we do end up losing Darrell, who again was just kind of more of the same. I think we've gotten what we're going to get from Darrell. Now, I can't imagine a season 40 without Darrell. Again, he is such a legendary figure that I feel like he had to be here. And again, I did think the moment of him overcoming his fear of heights was, again, at least a nice moment there. Again, felt very fitting for the 40th season, considering how major of a storyline that had been in recent seasons. So again, at least there's that. But really outside that, again, Darrell was just kind of what you would expect. Not really much more than that. And also we end up losing Tina. And Tina, I will say, was a big shocker to me, where again, I did not expect Tina to do well coming into the season. I thought Tina would be a pretty big dud coming into the season, considering I don't feel like she's really brought that much in the recent All-Star seasons. However, I thought she was pretty decent here. Again, she got in the fights at points. She was surprisingly decent in challenges, and she beat Emily, which is still pretty insane. Again, I thought Tina actually had a pretty solid performance here, to where, well, again, I don't necessarily need her back on the flagship show ever again, but again, I would not be opposed to having her back at All-Stars at this point. But then we move on to episode 8, where, what do you know, we start off the episode with Jenny still being upset at how no one cares about her, leading to more KC content mocking her, which is literally just an exact repeat of the last time we did this. While we get more of the Ryan Bananas feud, as Ryan decides to move rooms, get away from him, where Bananas himself ends up being portrayed pretty negatively throughout all this, and us even getting this like montage of him just talking about himself, which was kind of humorous. But as for the strategy of the round, we do see eras 2 and 3 actually being assumed to work together this time, with Derek and Avery both having been targeted, where it's just assumed that they would save each other, which does lead to eras 1 and 4 making an alliance, with Derek making a deal with Theo, though that ends up not really mattering. Though again, we do get to the daily, where it ends up being a challenge sponsored by Gladiator 2, supposedly. Yeah, really funny that's mentioned, but they don't even have a clip of the movie to show. It's just a thing that's mentioned here. It's almost as if they like lost their deal since filming, but like had to show it. But the challenge itself ends up being run in rounds split by gender, with everyone from their respective genders being put into an arena at once and have to push each other out using Roman army shields, which seemed very dangerous, where we do see Jordan getting an eye injury from this, with the metal from the shield hitting his eye, which again just felt like production negligence as expected. But again, this was a cool challenge conceptually, really just everyone wrestling each other and trying to get him out of the arena, kind of this like battle royale version of sumo at sea. But it's a challenge that was really dumb in practice, particularly due to how you win, where again, typically I think you would see again the last person standing wins, and that they would just go until only one person's left. However, that's not how this was handled here. Instead, they were given a time limit, and that each era gets points for each one of their members that survive that time limit, which is all really stupid, as again, means that era 1 is just auto losing this challenge. They literally only have 2 people, meaning that the most they could possibly get is 2 points. So again, this is essentially a death sentence for them. This is essentially just automatically sending them into elimination. The fact that they didn't at least try to change the rules to accommodate for era 1 having so few people is so ridiculous to me, as it just makes this challenge even more pointless. And even beyond that, even looking at the fact that they only have 1 guy, 1 girl, that means that they're by themselves in each of these rounds, meaning that they're such an easy target to be taken out because no one's going to be backing them. All this felt really stupid. But unsurprisingly, in the men's heat, we do see eras 2 and 3 gang up on Theo and Derek, with Corey even trying to make a deal with Theo, only for him to actually turn it down, and Corey ending up being really pissed here, to where we do see Derek and Cody getting into a fight, with Derek proceeding to throw his backpack at him when he wasn't looking, which again very much felt like the type of fight you would see in like older school challenge there. While the women's round was pretty mundane, where very few people end up dropping out, with it really only being members of Era 3, with Tori being the last remaining Era 3 member, where she actually does put up a pretty good fight with both Kara and Laurel going after her at the same time. Here it is the Era 4 pulling out the win, all while Era 1 ends up losing for having the least amount of people, which is really dumb, meaning that all that previous setup that we got, the alliance between Eras 1 and 4 means nothing, as Era 1 just goes in anyway. Though, considering the fact that we obviously got this setup of Kara's relationship with Theo, and also now this feud between Theo and Corey, it is pretty obvious what this result is going to be, with Corey and Avery obviously being voted in here. But we do get some intrigue along the way from Avery being annoyed at how Derek isn't willing to throw himself in to pay her back, which again kind of comes off as him being kind of a bad friend. But also we do see Theo and Jenny doing a lot here to try to keep blood off their hands, which seemed kind of pointless to me, even though it works out for him. Where we do see him get Era 4 together, and despite Michelle and Kylan still wanting to throw Era 2 in, we do see Theo and Jenny stay firm and wanting to save Era 2, but still end up wanting the entire group to vote to agree with them, just so they could tell others that wasn't their decision, which again felt so stupid and so see-through. And to be fair, we do see some people see through it, particularly like Devin, but it seemingly does work out for him, as we do see Corey getting really hung up on the fact that Josh voted for him, to where again they get into a fight, to where while they get Corey's frustrations over how Josh hasn't had his back the entire season, this was clearly a spot where this was more so a Theo-Jenny thing, and that they were always going to do this. And while yeah, Josh could have obviously fought more for him, I don't fault Josh too much for this, though. To be fair, it would have been a bit more understandable had he had good relations with the likes of Kara and Derek, which we've never really seen. So again, it just feels like him again further burning this relationship with Corey, which to be fair, he burned already at this point, so again, doesn't really matter. But also funny how like Casey literally does the same thing here. Again, Casey also flips on Corey in this spot where Corey thought she had his back. Yeah, seemingly no one is upset at Casey, though to be fair, that might be more edit, and again, Casey's just as relevant as she always is, to where why bother showing that side of it. But again, really funny that it seems like Casey gets away with this. But anyway, we get to the arena where after Corey and Avery are voted in, we get another Gladiator 2 inspired challenge that was really boring and had some very weird rules, where people have to knock off targets attached to their opponent while blindfolded, all while your opponent is wearing bells and squeaky shoes so you can hear their location. And again, this was just such a dumb challenge. And we do see Rachel versus Avery first, with Rachel easily winning here, with Avery putting together a pretty pathetic performance, leaving herself open for Rachel to have an easy time getting all of her targets. Though I know Avery has claimed post-show that she wasn't told that she was allowed to defend herself, to where, despite the fact that we do see literally everyone else defending themselves, it seems like Avery was not aware of that, where I don't know if this is just like basic miscommunication, or to be fair, I would not put it past production to let other people slide with the rules, as again, you could very much tell they would obviously want Rachel to win this elimination. So again, I think that would be pretty apt for challenge production to do something like that. But either way, the Corey-Derek matchup ends up being a lot more interesting here, with it being a lot tighter, despite the fact that Derek still has his injured leg, which obviously made it tougher for him to move around, though again, I think made his performance even more impressive, though again, pretty obvious that Corey ends up pulling out the win here, to where for winning, Corey and Rachel get tickets to the world premiere of Gladiator 2, which again, they still proceed to not show any promotional content for the film, which is funny. But with these results, Rachel's now on her own, the only remaining person of Era 1, in a spot where you would assume that they would stop this current format, as it doesn't really make much sense to continue on this current format where there's only 3 male targets and Rachel having to be a target just because there's no other options, even though it goes against their precedent of people being safe the round after their target. But no, for some reason, we just continue on this format, which again, just felt kind of dumb, where you could have just easily had Rachel like swap to another team. I think that would have been very fitting there, or really just in general, maybe just swap all the teams. Where I get that they want this battle of the eras, but again, you're about to make everything individual anyway, to where, and I think that they could have done a little bit more to shake things up here. But again, we instead just stick with the same format for one more round. It's a spot where it works out for them, but again, probably shouldn't have. But anyway, with that, we do end up losing. Avery's someone that I've always liked. Again, I always felt like Avery was a pretty affable presence on the challenge. But also, not the most riveting TV, to where obviously, again, I think she's one of the more questionable casting choices on this season. And someone that, again, I don't think really brought much to the show here outside of her stuff with Tony, but even then, I feel like that was more spurred on by Tony, to where, again, outside of that, just felt like kind of irrelevant to the rest of the season, though, again, still largely affable presence, just, again, one that's not the most dynamic television. Well, also, we ended up losing Derek K, and I thought Derek K had a pretty good run here. I mean, despite him, like, going out around halfway through the season, I felt like his run was pretty strong, and winning a few eliminations, and showing a lot of heart, as he typically does. Again, the fact that he stayed in the game for rounds after he had this massive leg injury that had him hopping around during challenges, again, the fact that he was still fighting through it, and again, almost beats Corey, despite having his leg injury, I think is very impressive. And again, like, considering the fact that he's had some pretty ho-hum recent challenge appearances, I feel like this is actually probably one of his better runs in recent years, where again, I feel like this felt very in line with the old school Derek that we saw a lot of back in the day that we haven't really gotten as much in recent years. And now for episode 9, thankfully the final episode of this original format, an episode that largely revolves around Rachel, but thus obviously get a lot of focus around how she's this lone soldier, the last survivor of Era 1, giving her all this really strong underdog content. Along with that, we get a lot of focus on her relationship with Ryan, where Ryan talks about having finally volunteered because he wanted to save Rachel. I guess that's the thing he thinks he's able to do, which again just felt like a very weird rationale for the show. But also we do get a lot of focus around the Vacation Alliance early on, with Devin, Tori, and Casey all being targets during this round, so I wonder what's going to happen there. But it does take us to the daily, where we finally get a daily that actually benefits smaller teams, probably too much so, where it felt like really the antithesis to what we had seen from previous dailies. Yeah, this is a challenge that has the teams first solve equations, which was again boring, but for every equation that they solve, they get a handhold to use during the main portion of the challenge, which is essentially just an endurance comp of them holding on to a container using these rock climbing handholds, which again felt tailor-made for someone like Rachel here, where it is a challenge that really shouldn't have been a team challenge, and it really ends up being a hero challenge for these bigger teams, as again, it's very unlikely you're going to have enough handholds for everybody to succeed here, so where you're essentially better off designating a couple people to just give all the handholds to give them better odds, where here we end up seeing Rachel end up getting 6 handholds, again, solely for herself, which obviously greatly benefits her in comparison to the other teams, who have at most 3 to 4 handholds per person. Again, most people even only having 2, to where, again, this does give Rachel a pretty easy win here, which, to be fair, was best case scenario entertainment-wise, but also rules-wise, as they never do explain what would have happened had Rachel come in last, though obviously I assume that because there are only 3 targets for the men, that one will automatically be safe due to winning the challenge, that the other 2 would just automatically go into elimination, though again, that would have been really lame. But again, Rachel winning here gives us this pretty great result, as again, she's someone that's obviously willing to make a big move, where we do see Era 3 lose the challenge in this spot, already sending in Devin and Tori into elimination, making it just a really obvious move at this point to just go ahead and just send the entire Vacation Alliance in together. But obviously we do get a lot of campaigning before that, with Jordan trying to get Era 2 voted in, which is funny, as that means that he's voting in Laurel, who's someone that had been defending him. And again, I would get it if Tori was on the line here, but she's already going in, so I really don't understand why he's fighting this hard for Kylan and Casey, who I don't feel like he has as close a relationship to as this, Laurel, but again, we do get talk about how Rachel should be voting in Era 2 to take out Ryan, as Ryan isn't going to win challenges to protect her, which, I mean, I guess, but also Kylan and Casey are definitely not going to win challenges to protect her either. So why get rid of somebody that, again, yeah, it's unlikely that he's going to win, but if he does win, he is going to save you over two people that, again, are more likely to win, and if they do win, they have so many other priorities over you. So I feel like that was kind of a dumb rationale, but through that, we do get a lot of focus here on Josh, who supposedly is close to Rachel, and we have Era 4 just assuming that he would be able to save them, and we see them getting upset at him when she doesn't do so, which really just felt like they were using Josh as their punching bag at this point. And Casey herself doesn't do herself any favors here, where we see this like really awkward conversation between her and Rachel, with Casey saying that they have an alliance, they just never talked about it, which felt like complete nonsense, and just felt like Casey here was just riding off of these relationships she had made in previous seasons, to where we really never see her branching out much on this season. Like, I legitimately could not even tell you a single conversation she has outside of her own group over the course of this season. But again, I do find it weird how the show, again, just kind of spoils their own show here by having Rachel say that she wants Devin and Casey to lose so that she can work with Tori, aka just telling us the results of the episode. But anyway, we get to the arena where Kylan and Casey are voted in, and despite this being such a big move that, again, I had been waiting for the Vacation Alliance to finally have to go against each other, despite that, I did find this to be a pretty mundane affair, at least in terms of how it was presented on the show, where a moment like this should have been one of the best moments of the season, but instead it felt so ho-hum. And I do think the elimination itself played a factor in that, and essentially being a puzzle of them having to connect cables to light up a board of challenge logos, which was so boring to watch and also really hard to follow on what exactly they needed to do. But also the puzzle just felt very easy, as there weren't many combinations anyway, to where, again, it just felt like it was mostly luck. And even in the Devin Kylan elimination, none of that ended up mattering anyway, as Devin just gets stuck at the very beginning where you've done take all the cables, where Devin takes forever to get through that, giving Kylan a pretty easy win here in what was a pretty pathetic performance from Devin. But then we get to the Tori Casey matchup, which was so close, literally only 5 seconds apart, and despite that, how emotional it was for them, this was so boring. Where again, it really was just such a lame challenge for a matchup like this, where I think with this you would have really wanted a really physical elimination that really would have played into the stakes of the challenge, but instead we just get this lame, hard to follow challenge instead. But again, Tori ends up winning here, as expected. But we do end the episode with the reveal that the format is finally changing, that they are now playing as individuals. But they still need targets, because we're still continuing on that gimmick, which each elimination winner being told to pick 3 targets, with Tori picking Derek, Ryan, and Bananas, with the Bananas pick being egged on by Devin, with Bananas being incensed in his confessional, calling her Devin's puppet. Which, I mean, to be fair, I do think this is a questionable move for Tori, to where, while Bananas did play this poorly in targeting Devin, and obviously Tori is close to Devin, Bananas still was never targeting Tori herself, to where from a game standpoint, this did feel like a largely unnecessary move that just added more vitriol from Bananas, and again, continued this rivalry that was there between Bananas and Devin, now putting it onto Bananas and Tori. So I feel like this is just an unnecessary move, while we do see Kylan proceed to pick Rachel, Aviv, and Jenny, in a spot where I was surprised they allowed Rachel to be nominated, considering she was the daily winner, and the precedent that was set following this. So at the end of the day, these noms don't end up mattering, though again, they could have, but even in a spot where they don't, again, I did feel like it was a bit cruel to make both of them nominate people in a spot where, again, like for one of these people, these nominations just simply aren't going to go through, to where, again, in this spot, Kylan's essentially making enemies for no real reason. Before moving on, obviously, let's talk about the boots. Obviously, we lost Devin, and again, Devin had a pretty big role on this season. I thought Devin had a bit of a different dynamic on this season. Obviously, his showmance with Michelle, where we haven't really seen him in a showmance on the challenge before, where, again, at least that was kind of interesting, I guess, though really outside that, it was kind of just more of the same. Again, him working the same people. Again, we got the resurgence of his rivalry with Bananas, which was cool at least, though, to be fair, I feel like a lot of the more strong content within that came from the Banana side of things. But still, again, Devin, kind of what you would expect. Sure, I get why a lot of people do really dislike Devin. I actually don't personally mind Devin, especially as a TV presence that much. I feel like of the Vacation Alliance, he's actually probably one of the people I'm the most fine with, even though, I do think he definitely hams it up a bit too much, to where I do think that can get annoying. Well, then we then lose Casey, which thank God. And again, Casey did announce post this episode that she's taking a break, which also, thank God. To where, again, I still don't get why they loved Casey so much and brought her back over and over again. Now, straight up, I do think if you were to bring her back, I think a season like this makes sense. Again, I think for season 40, I would have wanted the best of the best. And I do feel like Casey, again, as boring as she is clearly one of the best of the best. I think she is one of the best female competitors the show has at this point. So again, I do think I would have still cast Casey in this spot, but really only in this spot, as I really don't need to see Casey ever again. And I'm happy that we probably won't be seeing her for at least a little bit, hopefully. But with that, we then move on to episode 10, where we initially get focused on the Ryan Bananas dynamic, with Ryan talking about how they've actually built camaraderie now, which was never shown on the show. But clearly, I mean, this was going to be the episode where their dynamic comes to head. But also throughout this episode, we do get this bizarre gimmick that starts off with Corey mentioning how, despite Devin being gone, he still hears Devin's name, leading to the show just deciding to intersplice a cutout of him into scenes and act as if he's there, which was just so weird. But anyway, we get to the daily where we do learn the full format of the back half of the season and that we are now stopping double eliminations so that they can drag out the season even more, making the following episodes the typical Men's Day, Women's Day style format, which is lame as obviously the stakes are mostly one-sided, obviously towards the side that is going into elimination. Though I will say I did at least like conceptually what they tried to do here in adding more stakes for the losing player from the gender that is not going to elimination, that they get a punishment for the following daily, the daily that does matter a bit more for them, which is again at least an attempt to make this relevant for them, though considering how insignificant many of these punishments end up being, it does end up still lessening the impact of this edition. But on the more relevant side of things, we do get a minor shakeup from the previous format in that while the vote is still the same in that the winning man and woman vote in one of the targets, a dumb aspect of it is that the winning player of the opposite sex ends up having the tiebreaker vote, which again is dumb as there's only 2 people voting, meaning essentially that the person of the opposite sex has the sole vote, which again is just funny that they decide to format this way, as I mean again this essentially makes the winner from the side that is going to elimination just kind of irrelevant, as again the other side has the power anyway. So in many other situations you could say, oh, at least that person is safe, and I guess theoretically they are if they are one of the targets, but again, most of these people are safe anyway. Where I guess if you're not a target, you still want to win to avoid one of the targets getting immunity, maybe, but even then it doesn't matter because you're still not going in anyway. Though again, I do feel like that part of the format does feel kind of dumb, though I do think thematically it does make sense to have the person of the opposite sex deciding who goes into elimination, as that's really what a lot of the season's been about. It has been really focused on maintaining your relationships with the players of the opposite sex, and that playing a major factor into who goes into elimination, who gets targeted, to where again, I do think it makes sense based on how the season has been laid out, but it's a very strange quirk of this format in that, again, the winner from the gender that is going to elimination just simply doesn't matter. But again, a more major difference to this format, though, something I do actually like, I guess slightly more than the previous format, is that the losing player, no matter if they're a target or not, ends up going to elimination here, which again, does add more stakes for, again, the loser of those going to elimination, to where, again, at least that matters a bit more. But again, I still think this could have been a bit better with, again, the vote being so limited, being between only 3 people, though again, at the end of the day, the vote is still between just the targets that were picked in the previous round, where I still think a major issue with this format is the fact that that is still so limiting, where again, there's even points where there's only 2 options to pick from. The daily loser ends up being someone that was targeted anyway, and again, it just makes these results not particularly interesting with no real room to maneuver, especially if you're targeted alongside some well-connected players. So again, I do think this format is still extremely flawed, though again, I guess a slight improvement upon the format that we just had, but strangely again, only one gender will be facing elimination per round, so it will be going back and forth from this point on, though the way that the gender for this specific round is decided is by a coin flip, which again, pretty lame. Again, chalking it up to chance, but again, it ends up being a men's day to where Bananas, Derek, and Ryan are in danger. And we do finally get to the challenge, which was actually a pretty physical one of them going back and forth, transferring balls. And after that, they have to solve a puzzle, which was made even harder by the extreme heat with us seeing players struggling to even think during the puzzle. And we do see multiple people putting their balls in the wrong tubes. We do end up seeing Michelle losing for the women, after she ends up getting heat stroke, which was eerily similar to what happened to Caleb on her original season of Survivor. But I did find it really funny how they used this to set up an alliance that they didn't bother showing up to this point, despite it clearly having existed since the beginning of the season. But we do hear about the Ladies of Leisure, which comprises of Michelle, Olivia, and Naya, who surely won't be nominated together by the end of the episode. But on the men's side, we do unsurprisingly see Ryan losing the challenge here, though he does lose it in a kind of funny way in the fact that he ended up putting the puzzle pieces on backwards, not realizing that there was an image on the other side, though, again, I do question, like, should that count? Since technically he did put the puzzle together, obviously in the wrong direction, but he did technically solve the puzzle and actually solved a more difficult version of that puzzle. There again, I do question if that should have counted. Either way, if Ryan automatically going to elimination, that means that the vote now boils down to Bananas and Derek. Again, a binary choice that lessened the amount of options coming into the vote. But it's here where we see Ryan talking about not being worried to go against Bananas, saying that he's all bark while he's all heart, which I mean felt like a lot of coping. I mean, obviously he should be very worried about going in against Bananas, Bananas. So obviously he'd rather go in against Bananas than his best friend in Derek, to where again, I get where he's coming from here. But beyond that, we do end up seeing Tori and Jordan end up winning the daily, to where obviously that means Tori is in power once again, giving her the opportunity to backstab Bananas once again. And what do you know? She does. But we do get a lot in the setup to the arena, focusing around Bananas and us getting the setup to the Bananas Angels, aka the only people willing to work with Bananas at this point, with us getting this split house dynamic, with Bananas leading his side, that being Laurel and Jenny, who you would expect to be with him, Aviv, who felt kind of random, though I guess they were together in Era 2, so I guess that's something, and also randomly Rachel, which was very shocking to me in the sense that we've always seen them working against each other on previous seasons, to where to see them aligned in this spot was very strange. But also we do see this used to further her winner edit, where in this spot we see Kara talking about the alliance and naming Rachel the CEO of it, while making Bananas look like the figurehead, all while we see Tori talking about how much of a badass Rachel is and how she needs her as an ally, all while we also see Rachel starting a working relationship with Jordan, who ends up being a good number for her, considering the importance again of having allies on the opposite sex to keep you safe, which again keeps her pretty insulated in the game at this point. But beyond that, we also get a lot of focus on Jordan, who is seemingly targeting Bananas here, but not wanting to be the one to openly do so, with him backing Michelle and Tori and then wanting to target Bananas, which again felt very different from Jordan here, who typically likes to take the best to the end. And in recent years, it did seem like he had a very close working relationship with Bananas, so to see them turn against each other in this spot was a bit surprising to me. But anyway, we get to the arena, where we do get a lot of bickering between Tori and Bananas as he gets voted in, but here we get the reveal of one of the lamest eliminations of all time. And this challenge essentially ends up being Hot Pursuit from Survivor, again a classic challenge there, but instead of them going around circles and the first player to catch up to their opponent wins, but because this is a challenge, they have to do so on ATV, which was so boring. One of the most boring challenges I've seen on the show, though one is technically equitable to give Ryan a chance here, but he loses anyway. But this does lead up to a pretty fun scene of Bananas picking his targets, with him frothing to nominate Tori in this spot, only for the reveal that the daily winner cannot be nominated, leading to a pretty fun reaction of Tori just yelling, "Eat my shit," and Bananas seemingly being genuinely annoyed and frustrated in this moment, with again, it not even feeling like the typical hammy self that we typically see from Bananas, but this just being pure frustration, which was funny to see. But because that, we do see Bananas unsurprisingly nominating the entire Ladies of Leisure Alliance, during which he makes jabs towards them one by one as he's picking them, saying that they're all playing Devin's game, which kind of felt a bit gendered. But anyway, with that, we do end up losing Ryan here, who, again, I've said in the past, I don't particularly like Ryan on the challenge. I feel like he is someone that doesn't really have much of a chance on the season, and along with that, he also is someone that he never really does much to branch out on his own. He really is someone that just skates by due to being, again, a very affable social presence, but doesn't really do much actively in the game, and because of that, he's kind of boring to watch, though I will say he did have some fun confessionals here and there, and again, this rivalry with Bananas was kind of fun at a point, even though that kind of went nowhere. But Ryan's, again, somebody that I don't need to ever see on the challenge again. I feel like we got what we're gonna get, but he's not someone I like actively dislike either. Again, he's not like Casey, who is just so bland. I just don't understand why they're casting her. Like Ryan, I kind of get it. It's just that I don't know if we need that on the challenge at this point. So again, he can be a firm personality and confessional, but that's really all he is. Where outside that, he's not someone that's ever going to do particularly well on the show. But with that, we move on to episode 11, where we start with people's annoyances with Bananas. First showing Kylan confronting him about nominating Naya, and finally calling out Bananas for how did he not know that Tori would be safe, as obviously there's a high chance of the daily winner being safe, to which he ends up calling him either a liar or an idiot, which was fun, though I do think personally, I didn't even think of the concept of the daily winners being safe from being targeted in the next round, where, well, again, it makes sense conceptually and also gives people of the opposite sex further incentive to try in that daily, as again, they could at least gain immunity from being voted in the following round. It still is a spot where, again, I didn't think it was that obvious, as I do find it weird that winning a daily in the previous round gives you near immunity for the following round, with that person essentially also having the sole vote of who goes to the elimination. It makes that a pretty powerful role at this point. But anyway, we also do see a humorous fight between Bananas and Michelle, which starts off with Michelle storming into the room while Bananas is hiding in a closet, but it does lead to Bananas doing his typical thing of not accepting any blame for the feud he started, and blames him nominating her on Tori, I guess, because he definitely wouldn't have nominated her otherwise. But anyway, we get to the daily, which I actually thought was a pretty cool challenge here, at least conceptually. Again, visually, it was this very cool obstacle course set that has them doing a lot of climbing, jumping from platform to platform. That, again, was very cool visually, though I think the downsides here is that, again, it did make for a pretty lackluster TV product, especially with it being an individually timed challenge, which are typically boring. But here we do learn about Michelle's disadvantage, which is a 30-second penalty, which didn't matter, as this is a challenge that's very easy to DQ if you fall off the initial rock wall, which, what do you know? Michelle does that, to where it didn't matter anyway. But she ends up being not the only one to DQ there, where literally every other member of the Ladies of Leisure end up DQing there as well, alongside Kara, which was a bit more shocking. But it did seem pretty arbitrary the way they determined last place, which is by who made it the furthest on the rock wall, which I'm sure ended up being pretty marginal, and really dumb they couldn't factor Michelle's punishment into that, as that would have made her disadvantage actually matter. But we do also see Aviv do surprisingly well here, but does get injured along the way, which ends up plaguing her for the rest of her season. While also we do get some strange content from Jenny about her wanting to throw the challenge and not come off as a threat, only for her to go on and win the daily anyway, beating out Tori by 0.06 seconds. And meanwhile, on the men's side of things, we do get Theo being the loser there, in a spot where they do give him the dodo music throughout his run, with him really struggling on what seemed like a basic puzzle, and then even finishing the course, a spot where he almost misses the boxes that he's supposed to crash into to stop the timer. And again, all this was pretty bad luck for him. But here we do end up seeing Kylan going on the win to try to protect Naya, only for Naya to end up losing anyway, meaning that he couldn't even do what he wanted to do with these results. I mean, Kylan in a bit of a tough spot here, where now he has the pick between two of his closest allies, and Michelle and Olivia, to go against his showmance in Naya, which, again, pretty terrible situation, though we do end up seeing Michelle pretty quickly volunteer, which made the strategy for this round pretty lackluster. But beyond this, we do continue to get more drama surrounding Bananas, with him deciding to throw Tori and Jordan under the bus for protecting too many people, going to Naya and telling her that Jordan has other priorities over her, saying that she's not even in his top 5, saying that Tori, Laurel, Aviv, and Rachel are all above her, which might have been a slight exaggeration, as I don't think Aviv was higher on his board than Naya, but really the rest did seem pretty accurate here, and this did lead to Naya confronting Jordan about this and recognizing that he just gave her a bullshit answer, making her consider nominating him, that don't see have a direct effect on what ends up happening, but I guess you could say played a factor. But again, before the elimination, we do once again get more focus around Rachel and her being the strongest woman here, and also see her maintaining her alliances with Corey and Nehemiah, again, all which to further her winner edit. But eventually we do get to the arena with, again, no suspense, with Michelle volunteering herself, and the challenge itself ends up being a pretty boring one that has them solving equations, which again is always boring. But here there's at least a physical component of this, of transferring crates as well, which at least makes it more challenging, but still very boring. Anyway, Michelle wins pretty easily, ends up picking Bananas, as you would expect, alongside Nehemiah, because he's still there, and surprisingly picks Jordan, which, again, Bananas takes credit for. I mean, he infected Michelle's brain, I guess, which, I mean, again, if Naya actually did turn on Jordan, and Michelle nominates Jordan due to Naya not trusting Jordan, again, I guess you could say Bananas causes, but again, I feel like that's taking a lot of leaps there to give Bananas the credit that he thinks he deserves. But either way, with that, we lose Naya. And Naya, again, since she's returned, I do think she has become a lot more affable of a presence. And while it's obviously a very different Naya to what we got back in the past, it's still Naya I'm not opposed to having on the challenge. There was also something that I'm not, like, in love with on the challenge. I feel like Naya, again, if she's cast on seasons down the road, that's fine. I don't really have anything against it. She's also not something that I'm, like, clamoring to see back. I feel like this run in particular is, like, kind of one of those where, again, she did cause a lot of drama that happened around her. Again, we get this, like, Josh Tori drama, which revolved around Naya. The Naya-Jordan relationship is still, like, an interesting one. And again, Naya is at least, like, again, someone willing to hook up with people, which is something we don't see that much in the modern challenge. Or, again, she at least brings something to the show, though, from a competitive standpoint, while she is, again, fine, I don't feel like she's, again, ever going to win a season. Not really a standout in that light, to where, again, I think Naya is someone that, again, I'm perfectly fine with. I thought she had a fine enough role on this season, but not someone I'm, like, clamoring to see back, but also, again, I'm not opposed to seeing back either. With that, we then move on to episode 12. Where we start off the episode, again, focusing around Rachel, showing her build a relationship with Kylan now, that show her even more positively, and also showing her seemingly gaming this format, and her being this big proponent of keeping these relationships with people of the other sex, while also talks here about not wanting to actually win the upcoming daily, as that would mean that she has to make a decision in a spot where she would just get blood in her hands, because she has connections to all these men now, and that would potentially ruin those relationships she built up. But also, I really liked her thought process over who she wanted to go into elimination, where you get talk about how her ideal would actually be for Bananas to go into elimination, despite the fact that he is one of her closest allies, as, again, if he wins elimination, which he is likely to do, that means she's obviously safe, as he won't nominate her, which, again, I thought was nice to see her articulate that on the show, again, showing her really having a full grasp of how to play in this format, where, well, again, technically based on what the show showed us, she would have been safe anyway, as, again, she had relationships with all the people that were targets here. I still think, again, her being able to articulate this strategy, which felt on a relatively high level for something like the challenge in particular, which, again, has never been the most strategically complex game in the world. It was actually pretty cool content there. But beyond that, we also get some focus on Nehemiah, who, again, I think you could have easily forgotten was on this season at this point. So, again, I wonder what that could mean. Oh, we get Laurel content about how she doesn't need the money after her win on All-Stars 4. And this turns into this weird segment about how she wants to win the money so that she can give back to the animals of Vietnam. And mixing this with the fact that she later quits during the next challenge, it makes this entire segment about what she would do with the money just very bizarre. But either way, we get to the daily, which ends up being the mini final, but also a purge, where the last place man and woman are automatically purged from the game, while the second to last players end up going to elimination or get the punishment as expected, where I was actually pretty fine with how this was handled, where I do think if you're going to have a purge, I think having it at the end of a mini final makes a lot of sense, where, again, mini finals are obviously mini finals, again, a test of the skills necessary to win the game, and to have you losing that challenge be the reason why you're out of the game, again, makes so much sense, as it's essentially saying that you're not ready to win the game, you are the least likely to win the game, and again, I think that is a very fitting way for eliminating players here. But beyond that, we do also learn Theo's punishment for coming in last time, which is a 2-minute penalty, which does seem brutal initially, especially with his life in the game on the line, though funnily, this also ends up being irrelevant, with most people finishing minutes apart from each other, where Theo losing out in 2 minutes here really did not change the result in the slightest. But either way, the challenge does start with a digging section that a good chunk of the cast ends up timing out on, but really the make or break for this challenge was the final checkpoint, which had them running around and memorizing logos and correlating them with numbers and letters on the other side, which did seem pretty difficult, and this did cause a lot of placement changes at the end, with many, again, really struggling with the heat by this point, though this is where we do see Kylan passing both Bananas and Jordan to pull off the win, while Tori pretty expectedly wins for the women, with Jenny again gassing out and struggling to breathe like what happened previously, though we do get a pretty impressive performance from Aviv, who, despite hobbling on one leg, still ends up finishing middle of the pack. While Kara has a pretty underwhelming performance here, coming in 6th, even behind Aviv, to where for the women, it did come down to Michelle and Laurel for last, to which we do see Laurel proceed to just give up and say she wants out, where it did very much seem like she was going to lose anyway. And this is her seemingly just trying to protect her ego and making it seem like she's going out on her own terms, when the reality is that she was going to lose anyway. If not now, then definitely by the end, with her seemingly not being that competitive with the rest of the stronger women field here. So I feel like the fact that she ends up going out in this way, it's kind of underwhelming, considering, again, I feel like with Laurel here, especially how she was portrayed throughout the season, I think you would have very much wanted her to have this spectacular downfall in the game. Yet she doesn't really get that, where she ends up leaving the game here, kind of like mocking the process, which, again, made her exit from the game here a bit unsatisfactory. But on the men's side of things, we do see it coming down to Nehemiah and Theo, with Nehemiah shockingly coming in last, getting purged as well. But with that, we now see Theo automatically going into elimination here, and with Nehemiah purged as well, it does leave us with only 2 targets, Bananas and Jordan, with Tori as the daily winner. So I wonder where this is gonna go. But we do get more fun, incredulous Bananas content, where he really hams it up in the chamber by clipping toenails at the table and blows them towards Tori. But this does lead to a fight that culminates in him leaving and jokingly announcing to the others that it's him that got voted in, because no one would have ever predicted that. Which, while again, Bananas is a dick in this spot, and I never particularly liked Bananas, I did find him playing from the bottom in this spot to be very entertaining. But either way, we get to the arena where Bananas is voted in, and we get a Bananas Theo rematch from World of Worlds 2, but this time having a challenge that greatly favored Bananas, and it actually being a pretty interesting challenge, though one that did very much disfavor bigger people, where it has them having to squeeze through a small tunnel in a designated amount of time, but after each turn, they have to add more poles to the tunnel, make it more difficult each time they go through. And Also, at the end of each round, they have to play a game of high-low to determine how many poles each person adds, which again, I thought this was actually a pretty interesting challenge, and Theo does perform surprisingly well considering his size, but ultimately ends up losing as expected. But we do get some fun actually from the sidelines along the way, with Josh rooting for both of them, only for Michelle to be upset at him for rooting for Bananas, as it's like rooting against her, which, I mean, I guess, though, again, I feel like Michelle is being a bit harsh in this spot, but again, a fun little moment there. But unsurprisingly, Bananas ends up nominating Michelle and Olivia once again, this time alongside Cara, as he can't put up Tori again, as she won. But again, a pretty predictable ending to the episode, outside of us also getting to see the karma votes for the round, which again, we've been getting glimpses of here and there across season, though it largely felt forgotten about throughout the edit, though we did get some drama here from Laurel giving Bananas a 1, which did feel very strange after they had been working together throughout the entire season, with Bananas seeming like her only true ally, to where, again, this felt like a very strange decision, but again, this is Laurel we're talking about. But again, with that, let's talk about the boots of the episode, starting off with Laurel, who, again, came off so unlikable on this season. I really felt like this was a near worst case scenario for Laurel's likability, which, to be fair, she's never been the most likable person on the challenge, but I feel like this was essentially her tanking her reputation. To be fair, I don't think she came off particularly well after All-Stars 4, but here I do feel like she, again, came off on such a high horse. Her, again, fight with Cara was just such a bad look, and then her now quitting the game. Again, these were all very negative things, where I still do think we'll probably continue to see Laurel down the road. I don't think this is enough to keep Laurel off the show, though I did feel like this is just a very bizarre run from Laurel. One that makes me question if she was in the right headspace, while also, again, was really even ready competitively to be on the season. But at the end of the day, there's no way they were going to do the season without Laurel. I think you had to have Laurel in season 40, but still, it just ends up being a very bizarre run for her. With that, we then move on to Nehemiah, who is someone that I was so excited to see back on the flagship show. I mean, Nehemiah is someone that I really liked on All-Stars. I thought after All-Stars, he was probably the prime pick of someone to bring back to the flagship show and wouldn't lose a beat. And to be fair, competitively, he was perfectly fine on this season. While again, he didn't really perform that great in the dailies, I did feel like, again, he beat CT. That's something. Though sadly, he really did not bring much to the table entertainment-wise, which, again, I think is a shame, and it does make me think, like, was All-Stars 2 this just big anomaly? But really outside that, I feel like Nehemiah has really struggled with hogging up screen time, and I feel like this is just another season where he just kind of came off as an afterthought, despite him, again, still being a likable presence and one that I would not be opposed to seeing back down the road. And finally, we get to the formal boot of the episode in Theo, who also has kind of been a dud since he's returned, where, again, I was really excited to see him back for World Championship. And World Championship, again, he was a fine enough competitor there. Again, a solid run, even though, again, did not bring much entertainment-wise outside of a fight with Danny. And here, it's kind of the same thing. I don't really feel like he brought much entertainment-wise. I mean, he himself talks about how it felt like he was on vacation, and he was so focused on his relationship with Olivia, which, again, might have played a factor here. But, again, it really felt like, again, did not bring much entertainment, and also was not even that great competitively. Again, was towards the bottom of the pack for the men for a lot of the season, which was kind of underwhelming to see. Though, again, he still beats Paulie in Hall Brawl, though, again, you would expect him to. And I think he gets very unfortunate in the elimination that he goes out in here, to where, again, I think there is some unluckiness there, but still Theo ends up being someone that has just kind of had a lackluster return to the show, though still isn't someone that I'm, like, completely out on, to where, again, I would not be opposed to seeing him back again down the road, even though I do think probably these high hopes that we had for him before his return are probably not going to pay off at this point. Now for episode 13, which just started the typical return to the house, though this time, Bananas ends up breaking through the door somehow. But this does lead to us spending most of this episode revolving around Bananas, where here we do see his angels massaging each other's feet, and us getting talk from Cara about how she won't be joining them because of her bunions. And this leads to the opposing alliance talking about their feet. And all this was just really strange content about how is this on the show? Of like, why are we just all of a sudden getting all this feet content? And also somehow this is even the end of the drama stemming from feet in this episode. But well, we then do proceed to see a fight spark up between Josh and Michelle over how she acted at the last elimination, with Bananas joining in and leading to a Bananas Michelle fight. Again, not the last one of the episode, but this confrontation was pretty humorous, as it does end up occurring just as Derek is trying to teach Michelle about how to cook tortillas, and we end up hearing Derek giving his instructions in the background while she's yelling at them, which was funny. Anyway, we then get to the daily, which was a very Survivor-like challenge of them having to collect puzzle pieces inside a giant 40 dug up in the ground, though after they obviously had to solve a puzzle that was literally from Survivor, it literally being this cannonball puzzle that we saw like Evie memorize in Survivor 41, where here we do see everyone struggling on it, but here we do see Michelle getting a 1 minute disadvantage for coming in last time, which could have mattered more than previous ones, though really it seemed like a lot of this just came down to the puzzle. But she does end up losing here in a spot where she does get this really over-the-top underdog content that made it pretty clear that she was going to obviously persevere through it. Oh, we see Kara end up winning here kind of out of nowhere, where she does end up being kind of towards the back of the pack for most of the challenge, until she ends up pulling it out of the puzzle, with us seeing the likes of Jenny and Rachel out in the lead for most of it, with them having agreed to work together through the challenge, which I do think was a pretty good play for them. Again, they're in a spot where they really just need to guarantee they don't come in last, which is, again, kind of a downside of the current format, that on the day of your actual gender's elimination, there's actually no real incentive for you going on to win. And through that, again, it gives incentive for Jenny and Rachel to be working together in this spot. But on the men's side of things, we do end up seeing Corey losing there, with him finally being back on the show after disappearing for a little bit, while Jordan ends up being in a spot where we do get this pretty strange content from him during the challenge about the dangers of winning, as it could lead to him getting blood on his hands, to where, what a shocker, he wins. Which then, like, why are you doing that if you're so worried about getting blood in your hands? But he really ends up lucking into not having to worry about that, as, again, with us getting Kara winning the challenge, and through that being safe, along with Michelle losing the challenge and automatically going in, and both being targets in this spot where there's, again, only 3 targets, that means that only 1 target is even available to be voted in, that being Olivia, which really just showcases the flaws in this format, and that, again, this is just dumb that because Michelle ends up coming in last, that Olivia, who came in second, actually, is automatically going into elimination. Again, makes you just question, like, why are we so limited on the number of targets that are available right now? But also, it just leads to boring TV as well, where they really do get pretty fortunate in the fact that there's at least a sliver of drama moving forward, as without that, this would have been a truly dreadful episode, as, again, there's literally no vote to focus on beyond this. There, you can really just tell that the episode is dragging along with some really prolonged segments, which really just highlights how flawed this format is and how harmful it could be to the television product, to where it really makes you question, why did they do this? But again, beyond that, most of the episode ends up being pretty boring, though we actually do get a little bit of intrigue immediately following this, where we see the players on the bus on the way back, which, again, I feel like we haven't seen in a bit, and it's very much did feel like old school challenge, especially considering how petty everything happening here was, to where, again, we get more feet content with Bananas and Aviv touching feet while on the bus for some reason, which I will say I did find very strange. But this does lead to Michelle making a comment about it, with her even saying that she knows that this will get her a reaction, leading up to a big fight between Bananas and Michelle, to where, for the most part, this was fun drama for the show. Now, I did not like how Bananas proceeded to just make misogynistic comments about how women in a corner become nasty, catty human beings, but again, it was nice to see some drama here at least, especially as we do end up seeing Olivia and Kara backing Michelle up here, though I will say I did find it to be a bit of a strange position for Aviv, where, again, it feels very reminiscent to the Darrell Laurel content from earlier, of obviously being in a spot where this could potentially have affected Aviv's real life, considering the fact she's married with kids, and now they're implying something going on with Bananas, though, again, I didn't love how that went beyond the game, but I still felt like this was a pretty fun segment for the most part. Beyond that, again, we do end up wasting so much time before the elimination with not really much to show for it, where, again, we get a lot of Michelle and Olivia just being sad, like literally 3 to 4 scenes of them just moping around. And I find it really funny how the show proceeds to spoil their own show once again, where, again, it became so obvious that Michelle was going to win the upcoming elimination, not only because of the amount of underdog content, but also in how we get a lot of focus here on who Michelle's gonna pick if she wins the elimination, which, again, they don't proceed to do for Olivia, which, again, could not have made this any more obvious. But this leads to her wanting to put in Bananas and Josh, though third person ends up being a bit more interesting, with that being between Corey and Derek, with, again, more content from Corey and how Michelle is his number 1 girl, I guess, kind of comes out of nowhere. But here we do actually see him build a bond with Cara Maria, saying that if Michelle puts him up, that Cara will be his new number 1, which, again, I wonder what will happen here. But again, we get to the arena, which ends up being another Survivor-like challenge of them having to climb a ladder to get puzzle pieces, though they actually have to build that ladder, which in itself is kind of a puzzle. And following that, end up proceeding to have to solve a word scramble, which we do end up seeing Olivia having a lead throughout most of the challenge, only to struggle with the word scramble, where, again, Michelle, again, being a Survivor player, I think would have the ability to do word scrambles, because they do it so often on Survivor, and what do you know? She wins during the word scramble, during which we get this really over-the-top editing with heroic music playing for Michelle and this like slow-mo after she wins and the audience reaction. And again, this is all really built up to be this really emotional moment for the show, but it was just kind of fine. But after that, I can't believe it. Michelle puts in bananas, Josh and Corey. Who would have guessed? Anyway, with that, we obviously end up losing Olivia. And Olivia was fine throughout most of the season. Again, I thought she came into the season having a lot of interesting storylines, particularly around Nerys. So obviously they get cut short at the very beginning. And really beyond that, I did feel like she was just kind of there for most of the season. Obviously, we knew that she was aligned with the likes of Michelle and, again, Naya eventually. We obviously see her showmance with Theo, kind of, even though, again, they were severely under-edited, where, again, like, it kind of just sums up, like, Olivia's role in the season. The fact that, again, she was there. Definitely one of the lesser edited people, seemingly, of the season, and someone I don't feel like had that much of an impact by the end, though, again, she was just kind of more of the same. Though she is someone that, again, I do think is good for the challenge. I think she is someone I would want to remain on the show moving forward, where, again, I think she is still a solid competitor. She's someone that can bring drama, to where, again, I do like Olivia for the most part, to where this season didn't really change any of that. But now for episode 14, which was, for the most part, a really boring episode, where initially we do end up focusing a lot on Michelle being upset at sending her friends home and showing her being close to the likes of Derek and Cara Maria. Also later, we end up seeing that Cara is now close to Tori, I guess, where all this felt like a very random alliance to be coming together here, and just very strange that Cara, who had these feuds with both Michelle and Tori coming into the season, are now working with them, which again was definitely not on my bingo card what would have happened when she eventually returned. But also here we do end up seeing Derek talking about wanting to show that he's a threat and wants to pull out a daily win. So I wonder if he'll go on to win. Oh, we also get Rachel saying the same thing. Again, I'll never be able to guess who's going to win this daily. But also here we get some focus on Josh, with us even getting a flashback to the previous round of him having actually volunteered to be named a target by Michelle. Now, realistically, I think he probably would have been nominated anyway, especially because of the fact that he literally just had a fight with Michelle right before that. But again, the show tries to show as, again, he had agency in this, and he wants to prove himself in this spot. Because, again, that's something that Josh will definitely do here. But also, I did find it very funny how Josh keeps on talking about how he wants to win the show, to give the money to his family, like as if he had never won a show before and had the opportunity to give that money to his family beforehand. Where, again, it's like you're literally on this show because you won Big Brother. Anyway, we get to the daily, which was this season's extreme truck challenge. We have to do something crazy while trucks are running down the highway. And actually, this ended up being kind of an okay challenge from my point of view, where really all it was them having to swing off the truck and hit targets along the way. And I actually thought this was a kind of fun challenge, at least initially. Now again, seeing it be run over and over and over again to get very monotonous, I thought this was actually more interesting than many of the other challenges in this similar light. But here we do learn that Corey's penalty is that he automatically has one target against him, which doesn't seem like that much and really doesn't end up mattering. But I actually do feel like this is actually kind of a somewhat harsh punishment in the sense that because of this, he's pretty much locked out from winning this daily. As, again, this is a daily where clearly somebody was going to be perfect throughout all of it. And with Corey not being able to get a perfect score, again, that essentially means that Corey can't win this daily. And in a spot where, again, he's targeted, that means he can't win his own safety. Though, again, that was kind of a negative there. So, again, this is like one that could have theoretically been a true punishment. Though, again, Corey was just kind of mid at the challenge to begin with, where, again, it didn't really matter. But, again, here we do end up seeing Derek and Jordan both get perfect scores, where we do have to go to a sudden death round where Derek wins. Can't believe it. And on the women's side of things, Rachel wins easily. Who would have guessed? But for the losers, we do have seen Josh unsurprisingly losing here. Oh, we actually get a tie on the women's side between Tori and Aviv, to which they just end up announcing that Aviv is the loser, which was so strange as they didn't even bother explaining why. Obviously, I assume they must have done some sort of tiebreaker, maybe even done this sudden death round, like what happened with the winners. Though, again, none of that was shown and none of that was explained, where, again, I just find it really funny they just, out of the blue, they just announced the fact that Aviv lost, despite us seeing them get the same score. But beyond that, again, this episode gets pretty boring, with Rachel winning the daily, and with the choice now being between Bananas, her closest ally, and Corey, who, again, she was good with, but, again, not as much as Bananas. Again, this choice was pretty obvious, and because, again, they really had nothing to show for it, and because this episode just feels so dragged out, where we even waste a lot of time at the chamber, where, again, everyone knew what was already going to happen. Though I'll say a minor positive of nothing happening here is that some of these segments that they do end up showing here actually do end up celebrating the history of the show, which, again, considering this is season 40, I actually kind of like that aspect of it, even though, again, the segments themselves are kind of boring. But, again, we do get a recap of the history between Rachel and Bananas and their rivalry on the island, which, I mean, I should mention the fact that I do find it very funny that they themselves seem to forget the fact that they were actually on Battle of the X's together. But also we do get to see Rachel and Derek talking about them winning, what it could mean for the LGBT community. And with that, we get a montage of all the previous challenge competitors that were in the LGBT community, which again was actually a nice segment there. Though it also felt very self-congratulatory from production's point of view, where I do find it funny that very recently we had a lot of talk within the fandom about how the challenge is kind of lacking in the modern day with LGBT representation. So for them to really prop themselves up here in this spot was just kind of strange. But also we do get the show finally talking about the Nelson situation, where we see Corey calling him. And this is a nice interaction. And again, I still do generally think that there's a shot that we actually see Nelson back at some point down the road, if again, he's medically cleared to do so. And I feel like the fact that they, again, really hyped up Nelson during this segment is probably an indication that probably is the case. But obviously all this is meant to give Corey more motivation for why he needs to win, because obviously otherwise he had no chance against Josh in an elimination. But again, with that we get to the elimination, which was pretty built for Corey here. Actually being a somewhat interesting new challenge here, having a player having to go offense and having to run to hit a bell, all while the other player plays defense and has to run a shorter track, though has to jump over a hurdle, and that person will then be able to physically try to stop the other player from hitting the bell. Where, again, I thought this was actually a pretty fun concept for a challenge that I would like to see back down the road, though I think it ends up playing out pretty poorly, as again, it's just a blowout when it's Corey versus Josh, with Josh not even scoring a point, and Corey obviously, again, known for being a fast runner, just demolishes when he's playing offense, where Josh isn't even able to get close to touching him as he stumbles over the hurdle as expected. Well, all while playing defense, we see Corey just pushing Josh out of bounds, where again, this is just a pretty easy Corey win, and with that, Josh ends up getting a pretty sympathetic exit from the show, where we see him be very emotional as he leaves. And again, too fair, I did very much feel for him, as again, he just got so close to another final and doesn't make the cut. But again, with that, we get the new targets, where as expected, Corey just nominates the people that nominated him, and Jenny and Michelle, which, to be fair, typically I would say nominating Michelle just because she previously picked you would not be the most optimal play, considering it did seem like their relationship was still salvageable. But again, he's obviously in a spot where there's so few options, or again, because that, again, the Michelle pick is fine. And really beyond that, again, the final pick was between Cara and Tori, who he had previously set up as his two closest allies on the women's side, or Aviv, where again, obviously Aviv is going to go in, which again sets up this underdog content for her. They're having obviously lost the daily as well, where again, I wonder where that's going. But with that, we'd end up losing Josh. And again, I do like Josh on the challenge. I know a lot of people give him shit across his run, and to be fair, again, he's not the greatest challenge competitor, obviously, but I do think Josh brings a lot of fun to the show. I do think he, again, is still willing to get into confrontations. He still plays the game in a very sloppy way that makes him fun to watch. And while, again, he's someone that I don't really have much faith in ever winning the challenge, he's someone that, again, I would love to see him make a final. And again, I think when he does so, that'll be a great moment for him, to where, again, I expect at some point down the road, obviously for this season wasn't meant to be. Number episode 15, which was such a nothing episode here, one of the dullest ones of the entire season. But we do start off with content revolving around Corey, with him seemingly doing decent political work here, securing his relationship with Cara and Tori, with Tori saying that she'll protect him as long as he isn't against Jordan, which felt very ominous. Though we do then see him start to work with Kylan, with talking about how there hasn't been a black winner since Nehemiah on Gauntlet 3, which is like, yeah, technically not true, especially when including spin-offs, but even just the mainline show, there technically has been a black winner, but again, not a black male winner, and even then, still an insane stat, the lack of black winners across challenge history, to where obviously this ends up motivating them here, and again, would have been nice to see it lead to something, but it doesn't, all while we then get our episode dose of Rachel talking up her game, of how insulated she is by the strong men, because I never would have guessed that if that wasn't mentioned in this episode. But anyway, we get to the daily, which has a weird intro here of TJ being nowhere to be seen, and this to be edited like a horror scene as TJ pops up from the ground, which was all very strange. But this daily ends up being one having them have to travel through these dark tunnels and solve two puzzles along the way, which was mostly boring, though it had its moments, particularly from the final puzzle, which was a puzzle of TJ's face, with TJ just watching them make it and us seeing his reaction to seeing other players putting the puzzle together, where we see Bananas really bombing here, seemingly having one of the best times coming into the final puzzle, only to then not realize the pieces have two sides and ends up timing out, all while he talks about how much he hates this face. TJ just laughing in the background. We also got a funny moment with Corey as well, of Corey thinking it was his face instead of TJ's, and again, just seeing TJ's reactions to all this was really funny. But on the women's side of things, we do end up seeing making Aviv get a 2-minute penalty, though that doesn't matter as she gets DQ'd here anyway in a pretty weird way where she ends up breaking through a barrier in the tunnel, which was against the rules. But despite that, we then see her still like running around trying to find the puzzle and gets lost along the way, which really gets dragged out in the show, only for us to then cut to TJ telling her that you broke the rules and you're DQ'd, which was very strange how this was presented. And also, I would like to know if they told them about these barriers that they couldn't cross, as again, if they didn't, then I did feel like it was kind of a BS DQ concerning the fact that these barriers were so easy to knock over. But beyond that, it was also so strange how we then proceed to see Rachel go last, and the show like tries to pretend like there's stakes here and that all Rachel needs to do is not come in last and she's safe. But like, again, isn't Aviv auto last at this point concerning her DQ? Like, doesn't Rachel just need to not DQ? And we do see Rachel end up timing out on the puzzle at the very end. Yeah, again, I guess that's not worse than what Aviv did, so Aviv's last, even though Rachel still sucked at the challenge anyway. But anyway, from the winner side of things, we see Tori easily winning for the women. Again, continuing her impressive daily performances here, all while Kylan ends up winning for the men in a spot where he talks about wanting to protect Michelle, meaning that we get another boring result here, as with Aviv already going in and Kylan wanting to save Michelle and both being targets, that means that the other target in Jenny has to go in here, where again, it's another episode with no suspense, especially as obviously Jenny's going to beat Aviv in 99% of eliminations anyway. But beyond that, we do get some superfluous segments, one recapping the Kylan-Michelle relationship. We get Michelle's birthday with her getting a lap dance from Cara Maria as Carl, and Tori being in her bed dressed up as Devin, which was all weird. We get more feet talk from Bananas, with him constantly referring to his alliance as the one that has the prettiest feet. And we obviously do waste time on a deliberation, during which we do see Tori trying to plant some seeds against Bananas to Aviv and Jenny, though that really ends up going nowhere. So I did like to see Tori at least like trying to do something here, where again, I don't feel like we really see Tori do many things that are like openly manipulative in the game. And again, I felt like that was at least nice to see here. But either way, we get to the arena, which could have been an interesting elimination, with it being a pretty physical one of them having to wrestle a ball inside of a cage and then be the one to throw outside the cage to score a point, which again could have been really fun had we had two equal competitors here. But again, it's Jenny versus Aviv, so obviously Jenny demolishes her here. Sure, like Aviv also ends up getting this like heroic exit on her way out, being shown as like this motivation for Jenny, even though I believe from like exit press, it doesn't seem like Aviv and Jenny were even that close. But anyway, we get to the target picking, which even this becomes boring at this point in the season, as again, there's so few options, where Jenny's obviously going to keep Bananas safe, and with Kylan already having immunity, that means that the other three are just auto-picked to go in, which is so lame. But either way, with that, we do end up losing Aviv, and again, I was happy Aviv was on this season. I mean, Aviv is someone that obviously we haven't seen since Fresh Meat 1, and again, it was such a callback to bring her back for 40 here. Now, again, would she have been better off on All Stars than something like Challenge 40? Probably, yeah, but I did think having someone back that hasn't been on the show for so long was a nice touch here, even though I believe she was an alternate and it was originally going to be Melinda instead. But yeah, I do feel like Aviv's casting here did feel like it elevated the amount of care that they put into the season of getting someone from so far back. That being said, Aviv herself, kind of meh on the season. I mean, again, fine competitor. I mean, again, the fact that she never came in last until this last couple episodes, I think is pretty good on Aviv, considering, again, how much smaller she is than the majority of the cast. But really outside that, again, not someone I would really have much faith in to win a modern challenge season. I do feel like she's someone that is always going to be outclassed by some of the bigger competitors across the board. But again, I think Aviv here, for this specific season, season 40, I liked her being here, though I think from this point on, if she were to come back, I would rather her be on All Stars than the mainline show. But over episode 16, another drag of an episode, largely because of how terrible this format is, with again a bulk of this episode feeling like dragged out filler again, where we just start the episode with the typical spoiling of the episode, with Jenny saying that if her or Rachel don't win, then they'll be the next targets, and what do you know? Also, here we do get focused on Corey and Derek, so again, I wonder where that's going. But this does lead to a lot of wasted time on Corey, going through each player one by one, talking about how big of a threat they are, including a lot of hype for Derek, with so much of this episode being focused around how underestimated he is, where again, I think you could definitely guess where that's headed. But then we get to the daily, which is sponsored by Burger King, with Burger King really getting a bang for their buck here. Probably because they had nothing else to show in this episode, where we do get a lot of the players making Burger King references throughout the episode that just felt so over the top. But also they end up really hyping up this daily as one that they had been wanting to do for seasons, where they finally found the right location to do it, only for it to be a pretty lame one of them having to solve a puzzle, aka plugging in chords randomly, again just trial and error with no rhyme or reason to it. Or again, I don't know how that's really a puzzle. But then we get the epic moment of them driving off a cliff, I guess, and then they finish by swimming the shore. Again, a pretty boring challenge with pretty lackluster results as well. Now, on the women's side, we get to see Kara ending up losing there, with yet it really mocking her for taking her time during the swim, which is weird to see, especially coming from Rachel in particular, though. We also end up seeing Tori end up winning here, again, continuing her streak here. While again, playing off the previous episode, with Tori now being in the power position to make this choice between Jordan and Corey, as was set up. Except that Jordan wins the daily here, meaning that Jordan's out of the equation. And what do you know? Despite Banana's penalty, we do see Derek losing here. Also a target, putting us back in this terrible position where, because of these results, Corey, as the other target, automatically goes in, meaning that we have no content for the show. And meaning that we get segments of them eating Burger King and Corey calling his kids, which, to be fair, did lead to a funny interaction between him and Cheyenne. We also get content revolving around Derek Dead's sister's birthday, which, again, I do sympathize with him in this spot. But it's also, again, not good TV. And I just found it so clear that Derek was going to win this elimination here. So much focus on who is Derek going to pick as his targets, even though, again, that barely matters here, as it's pretty obvious what he's going to do. But again, we do see Jenny at least trying to save herself here, but trying to guilt him into doing so based on her having saved him back towards the beginning of the game, which again was never going to work here. And again, the show doesn't make a mockery of her for doing this, but again, I at least respect the fact that she at least tried. But anyway, we get to the arena where we get another boring challenge of spinning a wheel to open up a door that allows them to grab cinder blocks that they use to solve a puzzle, which And what do you know? Derek wins. I never would have guessed that. And what do you know also? He instantly throws in Jenny and Rachel. As the show spoiled earlier, there obviously has this ultimate choice between Michelle and Cara Maria, his two closest allies. That is, it wasn't for a fact that Cara volunteered. So again, this episode really has like nothing going for it. But again, we end the episode with a reveal of a location change. Which, again, cool to see back here, where, again, they used to do this all the time in the challenge. Or, again, I felt like they stopped doing it more recently. Though, like every other thing that they bring back from previous seasons, the show has to be really self-congratulatory about doing so. Though, again, still a cool thing to bring back. But anyway, with that, we lose Corey, which I did find this to be kind of a lackluster way for Corey to go out here. Where, again, Corey had been such a big presence on this season, this big underdog figure. I do think there was definitely a world where Corey was this very viable winner for this season. Yet, I do feel like the way he ends up going out here is in a spot where, again, it just is an episode that's entirely revolved around Derek. And, dude, I think it kind of makes it a bit underwhelming that Corey goes out in this spot where it really doesn't, it feels like he kind of goes out in a bit of a whimper, but yeah, I was pretty happy with Corey's run on this season. Again, I did think he was a very rootable presence, someone that was probably one of the more entertaining people on this season. So again, at least there's that. Now for episode 17, another pretty boring episode, though I guess not as lacking as the last couple, but still not good, where we do start off with them now moving to their new location in the Philippines, which didn't really change that much until the elimination, where, again, otherwise I definitely would not have realized that they even changed locations. But right away, we do get some focus on Tori and Cara, and talk about how they're friends now, with Cara mentioning being worried that Jenny will win, as that would mean that she's going in, which, again, do I even need to say it at this point? But again, we do continue to waste time with a segment, which again felt very reminiscent to the recap episode from Big Brother of the players just sitting around a table and talking about their favorite moments of the season, without getting flashbacks to them, which again just felt like such a waste of time. But and we get to the daily with the reveal that this is the round before the final, though for the men here, they're still playing for a penalty in the final, because otherwise this would be a pointless challenge for them. And in general, I find this very strange. I do think it's weird to give them this penalty, especially when the women don't have it, but obviously considering that there's like a separate male and female winner, it doesn't really matter that much. But again, I just find it weird that they did this. And the challenge that we do see here ends up being very final-ish in nature, of it having them going up and down a fortress, with having to carry cinder blocks and planks, and eventually solve a plank puzzle at the end, which has Jordan unsurprisingly pulling it out for the men, all while we see Kylan surprisingly sucking at the puzzle. It ends up finishing just ahead of Derek. Oh, on the women's side of things, I can't believe it, Jenny wins. But here we do end up seeing Michelle unshockingly being last throughout most of this challenge, though ends up pulling out the puzzle ahead of Tori, who really just ends up bombing the puzzle in this spot, really ending her impressive run at the dailies, meaning that she's going into the final elimination of the season. But at this point, we are set up for a pretty good matchup at the elimination, with it being Tori versus either Cara or Rachel, with Jordan making the decision in this spot. And with that, obviously this is a very obvious choice. I mean, Cara's obviously going in, where we do end up getting a lot of focus on Cara's overall season and how she actually made friends this time and repaired rivalries that she had previously, including hers with Jordan, which the fact that they had to highlight all of this made it very clear what was going to happen here, and really just lessened the stakes for really the rest of the episode, where again, it just felt so apparent that Cara was going home. And this also obviously going to be the point where this Rachel-Jordan dynamic finally pays off, and Jordan saving Rachel here right before the final. But again, we do end up getting to the elimination, which has everyone being ridden out to this decrepit ship called Sinister, where they'll be spending the rest of their season. And it's also the location of the final elimination, called the Final Elimination, which ends up being to just tread water, which was kind of a lame challenge to have as this matchup between Cara and Tori, but did actually seem to be a pretty brutal challenge, especially once we got to the second round, where you had to hold your hands up in the air, meaning that you couldn't, again, use your arms at all to keep afloat, which the way they stayed in the water for a pretty extensive period of time was seemingly impressive here, though unsurprisingly, Tori ends up pulling out the win, which again, should have been even more obvious considering the fact that Cara can barely swim also. Though, again, I do find it very strange, the fact that before this aspect of you having to keep your hands up, the only way to seemingly be eliminated from the challenge is for you to drown, which, again, very strange to think that that was what production was intending here, of you getting eliminated by just simply drowning and production having to swoop in and save you. But either way, with that, we end up losing Cara, who I was obviously very excited to see Cara back on the main show coming into season 40, though I'm a little bit mixed on her actual run here. Again, I think she did very competently competitively. Again, there were definitely some challenges here and there where she didn't. Again, she very rarely ends up losing a challenge, but also is in a spot where she very rarely wins either. And again, I think Cara just kind of has a very middling run from the competitive fronts, where I think clearly the likes of, again, Tori, Jenny, even Rachel were probably better competitors her on this season, but also from a entertainment standpoint, she also didn't bring that much to the table, especially after Laurel goes, where she kind of just fell into the background and again became friends with the people that she had previously fought with, which again wasn't super interesting either, to where while it is obviously good for her game, I don't think it's, again, really the Cara that I was fully expecting on the return. But I am still happy to see Cara Maria back on the show. Obviously, she is a massive legend, and I do hope is back in the rotation from this point forward, even though again she kind of underwhelmed me a bit on this season. But now for episode 18, which obviously starts the final, strangely airing on New Year's Day, because we definitely needed this season to cross over into the new year. But here we obviously get content about how disgusting the ship that they have to live in is, Jenny in particular being incensed at that, which certainly won't be a reoccurring aspect of this episode. But also here we get the typical lengthy game recaps, which end up also periodically coming up throughout the final, because we need to waste time to make this a 2-part episode. But eventually we do see them learning about the format, and we get the reveal of the karma votes, but still don't actually learn what those votes are, which is a bit lame in my opinion, of how someone could theoretically win most of the legs of the final and then proceed to just lose at the last second because of how these karma votes played out. But this does add to more suspense on the episodes. A lot of talk about how I could still win because of the karma votes, where we get a lot of those style confessionals across this episode, which just became so monotonous, and again clearly is a reason why they don't reveal these points early on. And again, they want to keep this level of suspense for the show, which they just utilize to just bash us over the head with it. But this does allow us to see the eliminated players talking through the finalists again, just to waste time. But the final format is somewhat standard here and having a series of checkpoints. So instead of them being time-based, this time they end up being placement-based, and you get points for what placement you come in. Though something I really did not like about this final is how swimming focused it was, where obviously a lot of finals do have swimming portions in them, but I do feel like this one here went really overboard, and us just seeing all these initial checkpoints all revolving around swimming to a location, then doing a puzzle, and then swimming back to the ship, which again was just kind of lame. That we essentially spent this entire episode watching 3 different versions of the same challenge, which was again just so repetitive. But also, again, I did also find it very lacking in the fact that this season, again, one that had some of the best, and a season that I think you could argue the winner of this season would be declared the best of the best, that this season ends up culminating in so much of the final just testing this one specific skill in swimming. And beyond that, I should also mention the fact that, again, considering this is Challenge 40, I did feel like this is kind of a lacking final format for something of that prestige, where again, we saw this like fantastic opening to the season that really called back to previous seasons. We don't really see any of that through this episode, with it again just feeling like an entirely unique concept, but felt strange as a way to end an anniversary season. But when also factoring the karma votes playing a factor as well, again, I just felt like this was just a very weird way to declare the best challenge competitor on this season. But again, through all these checkpoints being very samey, it does lead to very samey results, with Jordan just demolishing each of these heats, with him being far and away ahead of everybody, being the best swimmer on the men's side, with the show really even struggling to even try to add suspense that Jordan wasn't going to win here, with them focusing more so on how close Derek and Bananas were, even though again they were clearly fighting for second place. As we also end up seeing Kylan's poor swimming ability really come back to bite him here, with him coming in last in every heat, to where, again, I really did end up feeling bad for Kylan here, who obviously seemed very prepared for pretty much every aspect of the show except for swimming, and for that to become so prevalent in this final, in a spot where I don't believe there's even been that much swimming since Worlds 2, again, it would be very frustrating, especially considering how long of a path this was to even get to this point, and for that to all crumble down just because he's not a particularly good swimmer. Again, I think I would be pretty frustrated at this result. Something I do respect from him is the fact that, again, he never gives up. Again, we see him later down the road, again, really cramping in the middle of the water, like clearly in pain. And again, the fact that he actually persevered through that is something I actually do kind of respect from Kylan here. But I do find it very humorous that he gets so irritated at a point that he decides to just pee on the sign, which I know some people are like really insulted by, but again, I felt like this is just kind of humorous content to me. Anyway, on the women's side of things, we do see Jenny and Michelle being the top 2 in most of the heats, with Michelle being the strongest swimmer of this bunch, with probably being Michelle's best case scenario for a final, all while Jenny ends up more surprisingly performing very well in the water here, and also at the puzzles as well, and winning most of the heats, all while Rachel and Tori end up really lagging behind, where, again, I would not be shocked that Tori's performance was affected by the fact that she had literally just spent the entire previous night in the water, all while we see Rachel just end up underperforming, but again, that won't matter anyway. But again, as for the actual checkpoints, I don't really have much to say here, as again, it was literally just the same style of content over and over again. Now, I will mention the fact that we did see Derek's punishment for losing the previous daily, and that being a 3-minute penalty, which only mattered for checkpoint 1, which makes that punishment even less meaningful. And even then, he ends up passing Kylan by the end of that checkpoint anyway. I will say, I did love seeing the women outperforming the men for most of the checkpoints here, where, while obviously Jordan comes in first out of everybody, really after that, it was a lot of the time the women finishing before many of the other men. Sorry, I thought that was nice to see here, really emphasizing how strong of a female feel we had here. But we do end the episode with the overnight checkpoint, which was a weird one that had them like counting coins, though every 30 minutes they would have the transition to this singing a song for 30 minutes, which was very strange, though I will say kind of funny to see everyone so exhausted just depressingly singing this song. But the episode weirdly ends with Jenny just constantly complaining throughout this entire process, with the cast clearly getting frustrated at her and Jordan yelling at her to shut up, as that's something Jordan typically does. And we like end on this like weird cliffhanger of Jenny saying that she's gonna stop counting, which like who cares. But now for episode 19, the finale, which ends up being more of the same, where I 100% did actually expect there to be some different style of checkpoints in part 2 here, as again, you would think that on day 2, they would probably try to do something a bit different. But no, we just get more of the same. But anyway, we do start off with the culmination of the overnight portion, during which we essentially just see Jenny give up and just put all of her coins in and just make a random guess, which I did not even know was allowed. And if that was allowed, why didn't everyone just do this? Like, isn't it better just to get your sleep and base it all around luck than, again, just staying up all night and being miserable, as we see with almost everyone here? Where, again, we see, like, the likes of Bananas getting pissed off because he only had 10 more coins to count before having to go sing again. And we see, like, Tori staying up all night doing this, and finally actually being last out of everybody, being almost 1,000 coins off somehow, which I don't even understand how that happened. But this does lead to Derek and Rachel winning, with this being the only checkpoint that Jordan doesn't win across this final, which is, again, insane that Jordan outperforms everybody by that much. But again, then we get to the next checkpoint, which is another swimming checkpoint. I can't believe it that we're doing this again, and it's almost the same style of challenge. Who would have guessed it? Jordan wins again. I can't believe he would win a swimming checkpoint. And what do you know? Jenny comes in first for the women. Also, what a shocker. Though the second checkpoint of this episode ends up being one a little bit different in the sense that it's more so based around math. Now there is still swimming to the math portion, to where we then get 1v1 matchups of solving math equations, which was very strange, as the person that ends up losing the final matchup just automatically ends up being last. And that's a spot where it's just very strange that you can be somebody like Kylan, as we see here, be way in last during the swimming portion, to the point where, again, after everyone had already done their 1v1 matchups, Bananas just sitting there waiting for Kylan to finally arrive, and then Kylan just gets the equation there, and Bananas ends up in last despite the fact that he was so far ahead of him for the rest of it. Again, I think that is kind of lame, but either way, it gives Kylan his only non-last place finish of the proper checkpoints, so that's something. But then we get to the final checkpoint, which they name Champions Cove, which was so boring. Another challenge of them swimming out to a cave, retrieve a token, then come back. And it's like, yeah, what are we doing? So I will say, once everyone did end up finishing here, I did find this to be a pretty good moment of everybody celebrating together. And again, it did feel like this kind of celebration of the series that, again, I think is, again, nice to see for the 40th season. But anyway, we get to the results, where it is here where we learn that the karma votes end up equating to 2 checkpoints, where obviously we will see the karma votes actually play a factor here. It will end up changing the results of the women's side of things in particular, and also makes things a lot closer on the men's side of things than what they probably should have been. Again, the fact that the karma votes could actually play this big of a factor, again, I think is an issue here. Now, again, I don't have an issue with the fundamentals of the karma vote. The fact that, again, your past can come back to haunt you, even though, again, this isn't really a test of that realistically. This is more so a test of, like, how affable you are more than anything, and how many, like, pre-game relationships you had. But still, I do feel like, again, this concept is not inherently bad. I think what does make it bad here is that it has a direct influence on who wins the game. Again, I think it would have been a lot better if people were given, like, advantages in the final based around their karma votes, or there was, like, a purge, or there was, like, an elimination along the way that was determined by the karma votes, where, again, I think there were ways to implement this into the final that could have been interesting, but instead they just decide to make it a major aspect of this final, something that does radically change up the results here, where, again, it's essentially 2 checkpoints worth out of 9 at this point, to where while that's obviously only barely over 20% of your total score, it is still a decent portion of your score, where, again, I do think the fact that the karma votes played this big of a factor here is an issue, and it is something that obviously I think will be talked about for years down the road of, again, an asterisk on how this season ends up concluding. Mind you, again, more so from the women's side, as on the men's side of things, we obviously end up seeing Jordan win here, and none of the results here end up being changed by the karma vote, though we do end up seeing Derek end up getting the most karma votes, in the spot where I felt like the edit very much highlighted Derek here more than Jordan, which, again, it is a good story for Derek, but I found it kind of weird considering Jordan is obviously this winner of this massive season, again, potentially gets into GOAT status through his win here, yet instead, again, it feels like they focus more on Derek, though to be fair, again, I would not be shocked if that's based around how Jordan talked about them after the show. But again, Bananas comes in third, Kylan in fourth, what you would expect, though for the women's side of things, it ends up being extremely close, and again, I think it is a testament to how strong the women were here. Again, we end up getting Tori in last, which isn't as unexpected, but it ends up being extremely close for the top 3, again, only separated by 1 point, which is kind of insane. But in third, we do end up seeing Michelle drop down from second, and again, we see Michelle be really devastated here, and I know that there's a lot of reaction here about how Michelle was robbed, and again, I don't personally think so that much. I mean, to me, it would be if Michelle was in first and went down to third. Again, if it was, that would have been a tragedy. I think that would have definitely been a spot where I would say Michelle was certainly screwed. Again, her going down from second to third, it's like, yeah, it's less prize money, but it's not like you were winning anyway. To me, it doesn't really bother me personally that much. Obviously, again, for Michelle, I 100% get it. But I do think from an overall like season perspective, I don't feel like that's the thing that bothers me about the results here is Michelle dropping down to third. But then we get to second place with the reveal that there is no second place. And that because of the karma votes, we get a tie with Jenny remaining in first, though Rachel having gone from third to first, which that is insane. Again, I think this is the part where I'm like, this is pretty crazy in the sense that, again, obviously Jenny just completely dominated most aspects of this final. Again, outside of Jordan, she clearly performed the best out of everybody. I think her winning here was not a surprise. But again, for Rachel to go on the win, again, from third place to first through just the karma votes, again, I think is something that will definitely be this big asterisk on Rachel's win for down the road, and also leads to this being a weird ending to the season. Again, in a season that was, again, a lot of the best competing against each other. For us to conclude with a tie amongst the women just feels very strange. And obviously the edit really hypes this up as, oh, there can't be a more perfect ending of us getting a winner from era 1 and era 4. But it's like, I don't know. I do feel like it would have been a lot more satisfying if we actually did declare like a best of the best. And to be fair, in my mind, it is still Jenny. I do think Jenny is the true winner of this season. And again, not saying anything bad about Rachel Robinson as a person, but I do think her game here is, and it feels like very much like these situations in Survivor where someone wins due to a twist out of their control. And again, it feels like Rachel is in kind of that spot. And a spot where I'm kind of disappointed that it is the case. Because again, I really like Rachel. And I feel like Rachel, again, when I first heard that she won, I was excited. I was like, oh, Rachel probably just beasted it out in the final. And then now to see that she essentially comes in third at almost every point in this final and then ultimately wins at the end just because of the karma vote, which again, no one knew existed. And it's just a bit of a lacking ending to the season to me. Even though, again, I think Rachel winning season 40 is great on paper. I think it is this really satisfying conclusions and very satisfying storyline for the season. But I think when we're looking at it from a more practical point of view of like how it is in game, I think it is a very lacking conclusion to this season. Though I'll say, I mean, credit to Jenny that Jenny seems to be excited at this fact. I mean, again, if I was Jenny, I would be pissed off more so than I was Michelle, where again, Jenny goes from winning $400,000 to only, $237,000. Again, that's a pretty big drop off there simply because of the karma votes. So where again, I think if I was Jenny, I'd be a lot more frustrated. And again, credit to her that she wasn't. But also, like, after this win, I do find it very strange how we then proceed to get content from Bananas, who, again, very much comes off as, like, this proud coach in a way, which was very strange. Again, kind of reminded me of, again, reference almost no one's going to get, but of the Black Tigers on Sasuke with Katsumi Yamada, like, taking the credit for anything his proteges do. Again, it felt like Bananas here is kind of gloating about the fact that Jenny and Rachel won and how Tori and Michelle got what they deserve, which, again, was a very strange conclusion here. But either way, again, I thought this was kind of a lacking ending to the season. I mean, while the final itself did seem very, very difficult, again, I think the fact that it was just the same style of challenge over and over again, along with the fact that we got this karma vote change up at the very end, again, just leaves it a bit lacking to me. I do feel like at the end of the day, it's just another issue being tacked on to what is a very lacking back half of the season. But there we go. I mean, that's the entire season of the Challenge 40. Now let's talk about the finalists before we wrap up the video, starting it off with Tori. And Tori is someone that I think this was a pretty good season for her in terms of my overall opinion of Tori, where, again, I've been someone that I've never liked Tori since I started watching the show. Again, her involvement in the Vacation Alliance and her just dominating these seasons in a very boring way, again, has not been interesting. But Challenge 40, I think, was a season that, again, this completely turned my opinion on Tori. Now, again, I don't particularly like Tori still, but I do think I like her more than what I used to. And I feel like this run in particular, again, her having this rivalry with Bananas definitely added to her likability here to where, and I thought that was great for Tori. And also from a competitive standpoint, I mean, Tori had a very good season. Obviously a very lacking final, but really outside that, again, won so many dailies, won a few eliminations, again, had a very impressive run, especially considering the fact that she didn't have her allies in the game. And again, I think at the end of the day, Tori's run on this season is one that probably does stand amongst like some of the best like non-winning runs in the history of the show, to where, you know, definitely be pretty favorable to her when I get around to doing my top competitors of all time video, which again, will be coming. Next, I'm moving on to Kylan. And again, Kylan's another one, again, kind of got screwed by the overall final format here. I do feel like he's somebody that, again, had it been a more standard final, not one that just was almost entirely swimming, I feel like Kylan would have had a shot to win here, even though, again, I still think probably Jordan pulls it out. But again, he definitely would have been up there. And Kylan's someone that, again, I'm looking at as essentially the future of the challenge. I do expect Kylan to be a mainstay on the show for down the road. I do expect him to continuously get better and better and better at the show. And again, I would be very surprised if he does not end up being a winner in the near future, though at the same time, I kind of of said that about Fessy, and obviously that didn't work out. But again, I do think Kylan's someone that I do have a lot of faith in here on the return. And I do think he's someone that, again, I just think fits the challenge. Willing to get into confrontations, very good competitor, and plays the game very strategically. To where, again, I still like Kylan on the show. Next, then moving on to Michelle. And Michelle here is somebody that I never expected Michelle to have the run that she did here on Challenge 40. I remember coming into this, I was very low on Michelle. I thought she had a big target on her back. I didn't think anyone really wanted to work with her. And again, considering that fact, the fact that she made it all the way to the final, and again, almost won, is pretty impressive. I mean, like, she was, again, 1 point away from tying with the winners. And again, had she just gotten more karma votes than Tori, she wins this season. And she is extremely close to the win here. Now, I'll say this was a final that felt very catered towards her. I don't know if she's able to repeat this on most given seasons. Again, this is a final that was entirely swimming, one of Michelle's strong suits, where again, I think in a season that has a lot more physicality to it, I don't know if Michelle is necessarily doing the same thing. But again, Michelle actually making it to the final here after winning a few eliminations. And I think it was a good showing for Michelle. And Michelle's another one that, again, I can see being one of the big stars of the future of the challenge. Now, I know she's already said that she's taking a break from the show in the immediate future, but still, I think Michelle, when she comes back, I think definitely can continue to increase her legacy if she continues to perform the way she did on this season. Next up, moving on to Bananas. And Bananas is someone that, again, I've never particularly liked Bananas either. Again, I appreciate what he brings to the TV show, but I don't ever particularly liked him. And to be fair, that didn't necessarily change on this season. I don't feel like Bananas particularly came off as likable on this season. But again, he brought good TV. I mean, I'll give him credit for that. Again, he had these feuds with, the likes of Tori, Michelle, even like Cara Maria. Again, him being this underdog that actually makes it all the way to the end, I think made it a pretty interesting arc for Bananas. And I think from a competitive standpoint, I'm considering, again, he's in his 40s now. The fact that he's still consistently making it to finals, and again, like, not being a complete slouch there either. I think Bananas is a pretty impressive player, and one that I think my opinion of him as a whole kind of went up after this season. Now moving on to, I guess, the only true second placer of the season, we got Derek. And Derek is somebody that, again, shocked me on this season. Again, I was someone that I was very low on Derek for most of his challenge career. Again, when he came back for All-Stars 2 and was the first boot, I was like, okay, well, Derek hasn't really changed. But again, he came back for All-Stars 4, performed pretty admirably. Again, got to the final, had some daily wins along the way. But again, coming into this season, I thought he was pretty dead in the water. I thought he would end up the way that Ryan ended up. If again, like a mid-game boot, someone eventually takes into elimination as an easy win. But again, Derek was able to overcome that. Again, went to elimination against Corey, beat Corey, avoided elimination for most of the season, while also performing pretty well in dailies for the most part. And again, ultimately coming in second in the final, even taking out the karma points. Again, Derek performed very admirably on this season, to the point where I do expect to see Derek also become a pretty main. And considering how much they hyped him up in the edit, I do very much expect Derek to remain on the show from now on. Again, I would expect him to be on these upcoming seasons, and I think it'll be very interesting to see if he can actually pull out a win in upcoming seasons. As again, I think he has the potential, especially without someone like a Jordan there, to where again, I think Derek is someone that definitely has potential for down the road. And now for the winners of the season. Let's start off with Rachel Robinson. And again, I like Rachel. Rachel is obviously a legend of the game. I think nothing's really changing that. At the end of the day, though, again, her win definitely does an asterisk here. Again, I think she's someone that I wish was better than what she was, straight up. I mean, I think she's someone that, again, I was hoping that she would at least come in second in most of the checkpoints. But again, for her to come in third and then win through the karma points, again, kind of underwhelming there. Beyond that, again, had a solid performance across the season. Again, very rarely came in last. Mind you, again, didn't win many dailies along the way, but again, won a couple eliminations. Did win that one daily on her own, which, I mean, to be fair, probably was easier that way. But still, again, I think Rachel, again, obviously had a very impressive performance. Again, considering she was the last standing person from Era 1 and went on to win. Again, I think it's a very, very good story. Then we're moving on to Jenny. And Jenny has a very weird edit on this season. I mean, Jenny obviously wins the season pretty easily. Again, while again she ends up tying with Rachel, again, she was far and away ahead in terms of the actual proper aspects of the final. Beyond that, again, also pretty easily won every elimination she was in. She, again, won a decent amount of dailies. Again, was toe-to-toe with Tori for a lot of the season. Again, has a very impressive winning game after having a very impressive winning game back in Total Madness. Where, again, I think we're at the point now where I think Jenny is one of the best challenge competitors of all time. Again, wish we got a little bit more there for the resume, but again, still very good competitor. But it feels very strange considering the fact that I don't know if production necessarily likes her. The fact that she got such a negative edit at points across the season, especially in these final two episodes. Again, we just got her constantly complaining and seeing people being annoyed at her complaining. Just felt very weird for the winner of the 40th season. To where, again, it obviously feels like they very much were more happy with Rachel winning and tried to give Rachel this really glowing edit while kind of neglecting Jenny in the edit in that. And I think that's just a very strange way that she was portrayed here. But again, I think Jenny still is a mostly laughable person. Again, I have no issues with Jenny. I don't think she's the most riveting TV in the world, but yeah, I think she's an incredible competitor and one that, again, I'm not opposed to seeing back down the road. Also something I'm not necessarily clamoring for it either. And with that, let's wrap it up by talking about the male winner of the season, that being Jordan. And again, I think this was an incredible season for Jordan. Again, Jordan's somebody that I already held in pretty high esteem, as most people, but I did not feel like he stood up as, again, the best of all time. I felt like he was, for me, clearly in third, though I think this is a season here where I think we gotta have the conversation. And again, I will in my top challenge competitor video eventually down the road. But again, still, I feel like this is an insanely impressive performance from Jordan. Again, never going to elimination the entire season, winning so many dailies, again, blowing out everybody in this final. Again, it is a very impressive performance. Mind you, again, final was one that was testing pretty much one skill, and again, that's a skill that Jordan was very, very good at. But again, Jordan just had such an easy win on this season. So again, I think there's certainly the argument he's the best of all time at this point. Now, from a more TV standpoint, he was just kind of there. I felt like Jordan actually got kind of under-edited across this season, and I do wonder if, again, that's because of him, again, calling out production post-show and was clearly upset at them during the season. So with that said, again, I'm not sure if we'll see Jordan again for a while, but obviously Jordan is still this, again, massive legend of the game, one of the most recognizable names of the show, and someone that his win here, I think, was a very satisfying conclusion to the season. But again, with that, that is the entirety of the Challenge 40 Battle of the Eras, a season that was just kind of fine, I guess. Again, it's a season of two halves. Again, the first half, I think, was solid. Again, not great. I think it was, again, better than most other recent seasons, but again, still not to any extreme. I think probably in line with something like an All-Stars 4 and All-Stars 3 of, again, these kind of like middling, more recent seasons. But then the back half is kind of dreadful. Again, it's such a massive slog for those last few episodes. And again, with a very lacking final as well, again, it does kind of sour my opinion by the end, to where by the end of it, it's essentially just back in line with, again, the likes of Ride or Die, Spies, Lies, and Allies, Double Agents, where, again, I just think it's very tough to produce a very consistent season when you have 19 episodes or 90 minutes each. So again, the challenge is simply a show that does not need to be that long. It would be so much better if it was shorter. Yeah, instead we have to have these very bloated seasons because they need to fill up time on the MTV schedule, which, again, I do think is very much harming the product as a whole. But, and had some good moments. I thought it had some good competitors. I do question a lot of production decisions. Again, the format was truly terrible. And I think it ends up being a pretty lacking anniversary season by the end, but not without any merit. And again, I think there are little things that they do across season I do respect, but it's simply just not enough to actually make this a genuinely good season. And with that, that's my review of Challenge 40. Now, again, All-Stars Rivals is about to start. I will be doing a review of that more than likely. At least I plan on it. So again, stay tuned for that. Also, I will be doing, as alluded to, again, a top 10 challenge competitor video. Again, one for male, one for female. I will be doing those in the somewhat near future. Again, at some point before the end of Rivals, probably. Also, again, obviously, we're probably going to get a 41 cast relatively soon. I'll do a cast reaction to that. And again, just in general, again, stay tuned for more challenge content points down the road. But for now, I guess that's the video. Thank you for watching.